Sitting in his room. Member for St. Michael West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I look at estimates normally with a view to trying to identify the strategic direction that the Minister of Finance, by extension the government, is seeking to take to bring meaningful and deliberate change to our economic profile in Barbados. I don't only look to the numbers, but I don't only look to the variance in the numbers, but I look to see if I can identify the strategic direction, the strategic aims clearly indicated behind those numbers. When I looked at the estimates documents with respect to the proposed year ahead, I struggled to find out, I struggled to identify. Clearly, that strategic course upon which we are embarked in an effort to bring about that meaningful and positive change in our economic profile, in our economic orientation, in the fortunes of both individuals and businesses in Barbados. And there was some difficulty with respect to these estimates. Now, I know that in light of the current health threat to the nation, indeed to the region, to the world, the estimates that we have been discussing, scrutinizing over the last several weeks, perhaps failed to connect with that unanticipated reality which now obtains. That is understood. But we still have to look at the estimates which were laid before the House, because it reflects the intentions of government prior to this COVID-19 threat. I would think that one of the principal aims of any budgetary proposals, any estimates, plans and projections would be to see how significantly we can effect change in the culture that obtains around our economy. So, Deputy Speaker, my view is, and I hold this unapologetically, that what we have obtaining in Barbados now is a survivalist struggle to make ends meet syndrome. People have been reduced because of our economic stresses, and one may lay blame on the past 10 years if one chooses to do so. One may focus solely on the last 2 years if one chooses to do so. One may look fully over the period of the last 12 years, or one may go even farther beyond that and go back to 2007, 2006, 2005. Wherever we locate its genesis, the fact is, the reality is starkly with us. That what obtains among people, the perhaps principal dynamic that reflects itself in the experiences of our people today, is that survivalist mindset, that struggle to make ends meet syndrome. And we can't escape that. It is sadly true. It is not sufficient to lay blame upon any administration. It is not sufficient to focus upon any particular period. We've got to come face to face with and confront the reality that does exist. And that is the reality that does exist. I don't see in these estimates a clear strategic attempt to bring about a shift away from that survivalist struggle to make ends meet syndrome mindset that now possesses the majority of our people. Historically, over the years, there has been a perpetuation of an impoverished, dependent underclass in Barbados, now surviving, now struggling to get by on those survivalist instincts. Any government that comes to office with any serious sense of mandate must understand, needs to understand, that its charge is to try to change that. When we're given the majority numbers of 30 against 0, then we have to come face to face with the responsibility laid by the people on our doorstep that we anticipate and expect that you will bring about incrementally, but over time, fully, more fully, a change in that reality. For Barbados in 2020, still to be largely characterized by an impoverished underclass of majority numbers is not good enough, considering the investment we have made in healthcare, the investment we've made in education, from the primary, even pre-primary, to tertiary, and in a sense, post-tertiary level. Education is supposed to be, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the vehicle, the instrument that brings about economic elevation, that gives us mobility, upward mobility, moving from the bottom of the rungs of the underclass ladder up the ladder to become perhaps the average working class person, the lower middle class, upper middle class, etc. That's the normal movement. Education is supposed to be the vehicle to do that. We seem to understand that because we still continue to expend, and I should say, rather than expend, invest large amounts of money in education in Barbados, and rightly so. But we're seeing diminishing returns, in my view, Mr. Deputy Speaker, on that investment. And many in this august chamber are here, having started in an environment and a culture of underclass poverty. It was the experience of their parents and grandparents. It was the experience of the generation before them. But they have now come to this place of privilege, both physically and figuratively, because of the vehicle, the instrument we call education. And we have hailed that as the transport that has brought many from point A to point B and holds the promise of carrying them even further as Barbados continues to take its place of pride in the world. The recent times reflect, Mr. Speaker, that vehicle has not been bringing as many along as used to be the case. Therefore, I suggest, and very urgently so, we need to examine the state of health, the condition of that vehicle, to see whether we are properly keeping in good shape its component parts, see whether or not the vehicle is still fit for purpose, still fit for the purpose it was intended to serve. Because despite the increasing levels of funding, more and more seemingly are being left behind and seemed ever doomed to be a part of that impoverished underclass of people who struggle to survive in today's world. We should have been looking in Barbados to see the development of a wealth-creating mindset. There's a big difference, we've always been told, between making money and earning money and creating wealth. And we should have been looking to see development of that wealth creating mindset, as opposed to simply the manifestation of a money earning mindset. Rather, therefore, Mr. Speaker, that the movement be one which goes beyond a money earning mindset to a wealth creation mindset. We seem to have seen a reversal of those gains. And people today in Barbados struggle to pay basic bills. People today in Barbados struggle to buy food. That is not a political comment, Mr. Deputy Speaker. That is the reality. I know them in St. Michael West. You know them in St. George North. We meet them on the streets. We see them in the markets, and they're struggling. I am sure, Mr. Speaker, every time you have been to the supermarket, and I assume you do go, and every time you have gone to the cashier, you have encountered someone who is seriously asking of you that you pay for yours as well as theirs. It is a reflection of what obtains out there. Don't think it is simply a reflection of the average Joe trying to take advantage of a politician. People feel the economic stresses, and therefore, in an effort to survive, they are reduced to that type of practice. And that is the Barbados of today. Estimates, in my view, should be the kind of instrument that represent an effort to move people from that place where they seek to survive beyond the point where they're given an opportunity to make money and reaching the point where you encourage a climate in which wealth can be created even at the poorest level in Barbados. Now, I seriously feel strongly all of those things, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and it is more than mere philosophy. It is a genuine sentiment that suggests to me government is about helping to bring average Joe from where he is to the point where he aspires to be, creating the environment in which his efforts can find success, and that the story told of him is that he has found advancement having been facilitated by the policies of the government which he has elected to serve his interests. I don't know that I note significantly anything in these estimates which suggests a change in the economic orientation of Barbados to move the majority of Barbadians from underemployment and unemployment to a place of meaningful employment. What is there in the tourism figures that suggest that the jobs available in the tourist sector, if any, are going to be more than menial? What is there in the estimates of the international business sector that would reflect that Barbadians will find meaningful jobs in that sector because it is a sector that will thrive a bit more so this year than it did last year? What is there in the estimates of the Ministry of Commerce, Small Business, Entrepreneurship, which suggests that we will establish from among those elements that we're giving an initial start, the kind of class that will find the efforts to be viable and sustainable in such a way that they can come to the place where they themselves start to contribute to employment in Barbados and become employers. That is the way I tend to look at estimates.
On a point of order, Mr. Speaker,
Member for
Deputy
St.
Speaker.
George South.
The honourable member for St. Michael West is misleading the House. We sat, several ministries came and presented their program budget for the year 2020-2021. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, for the honourable member in his presentation to say that there's nothing in the estimate, when he knows very well that we are under the program and we have fiscal prudence as a government, but we articulated transformation programs when he speaks to commerce. We spoke on several initiatives within the Ministry of Commerce We can't do the well again, but it will do justice to the people of this country if the member for St. Michael West tell the true state of affairs when we present it. I can't go into all of the details as this speech, but on a point of order, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the honorable member is misleading the House. We did articulate programs that will transform this economy within the micro, small, and medium enterprise sector.
All right. Member for St. Michael West, continue.
I thank the honorable member for his intervention, and I'm glad to know that he was listening. I observe that he has been listening for most of the time he has been in the chamber today, unlike all the rest of his other colleagues, all of whom failed to listen for one moment to the honorable member for Christchurch East Central when he made his presentation earlier. But I'm glad the honorable member for St. George South is listening, and we're both here.
On a point of order.
Point of order.
The honourable member is misleading the chamber. The honourable member can speak for himself as to whether or not he was listening, but I don't think he can impute the attention span of anybody else in this chamber. I am sure that all who are here, like myself, were listening attentively to the honourable member for Christchurch East Central as he delivered what was a sterling address. He spoke about COVID. He spoke about the government's plans, he spoke about the difficulties we're going through as a country, and he spoke about the need for us to remain focused. So for the honourable member to impute that I was not listening and to take that as far as the rest of my colleagues, I think he need not go there. That is entirely misleading.
Well said. Go ahead, honorable member.
And indeed, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that was well said. My emphasis was not on who was not listening. My emphasis was on the fact that all members of St. George South.
You want to find out who were listening?
My emphasis was on the fact that the honorable member of St. George South was listening, and not that others. My emphasis was not on the fact that the others were not listening. I simply sought to stress that the honorable member of St. George South has been listening all day while he has been here.
Okay, let's
But he has
continue.
not been listening. But he has not been listening very carefully. He has not been listening very carefully, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because I raised a question. I did not intend or seek to mislead the House. I raised a question. What is there in the estimates of the Ministry for Small Business, Entrepreneurship and Commerce, which suggests that there is a deliberate strategy to move those who are now being given a helpful first start, initial start, from that point to the point where they become so viable as entrepreneurs that they contribute to employment in Barbados and that they sustain themselves with a relatively high degree of success over time. That was my question. So though he listened, the honorable member, he did not listen carefully enough.
And what did you raise?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I rise on a point of order. The honourable member again is seeking to mislead the chamber and the public. And if I have to rise, with all due respect, Mr. Deputy Speaker, on more occasions, I will do so because the honourable member knows very well when he speaks to employment. We quoted figures during the estimates when the Ministry of Small Business, Entrepreneurship and Commerce had the opportunity to present to this Lord Chamber and to the public the number of persons who access loans and the employment generation over the last year and what we intend to do moving forward. So to say that we have come here with estimates that have not contributed within my ministry to employment generation is again misleading the chamber and the public. Mr. Deputy Speaker.
All right. That's your opinion. Let's continue, honorable member.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I will move beyond that point so as not to further stress my honorable friend out of the country. You know, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I believe a part of the responsibility of the government, and substantially so, is to create an environment for domestic investment. An environment for domestic investment. We hear a lot of talk about investment. There's an whole aspect of the Ministry of the Prime Minister's office, which is given the responsibility of investment. And much of the time, the investment of which we're speaking here is foreign investment. But I believe that a huge part of the mandate given of the people to a government when elected is that the government seeks to create a climate for domestic investment, a climate for attracting the domestic investor to the marketplace. The reality that we have experienced over the past year, year and a half, going to 2 years, we have experienced the reality of people developing a fear of investing their hard-earned gains in especially state-sponsored instruments. We all know of the experience of debt restructuring and debt default and how it impacted not only institutions in Barbados, but impacted individuals as well, among them pensioners. And that action, thought prudent by the government, has created in the market space in Barbados with respect to domestic investment a fear that is understood. All I'm seeking to say, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that when I look to the estimates, figures, the numbers, the documents, I look to see certain things. I look to see the deliberate and calculated policy projections intended significantly to shape and to change and to shape certain aspects of our economic orientation. When it comes to investment, we must come to a place where there is created around us in the domestic space an environment that the private interests at home find it appealing and attractive to put their capital. I do not think that that is now the case. Now, the focus of technology, the use of it, the improvement of the tech world in Barbados, as represented in the numbers in these estimates, seems to me to suggest that government's huge emphasis is about improving the way government does its business, the way government provides services to or interacts with various publics in Barbados. So the focus of technology seems to be targeted at improving the delivery of government services, whether it is immigration or land tax or what have you. It's about improving the government services' capacity to interact with its various publics and to upgrade the efficiency of its service. Don't think that there is a sufficiently significant attempt represented to use the technology as a platform for young entrepreneurs. My honorable friend from St. George South will find in this cause to rise again. But that's all right, because it's about debate and it's about discussion and it's about different sides to a story. And the side I'm telling you right now, the side that seems to be persuasive to me, is that one, that the use of technology is represented in these numbers across ministries is about improving government capacity and efficiency rather than creating or facilitating the creation of the type of technological platforms that will appeal to young people in particular to come into the world of the entrepreneur and to be driven by motivations of self-employment interest and to use their creativity and their skills and their knowledge and their comfort, level of comfort with the tech world to drive their own pursuits as they seek to advance their own lives in this country. The economy of the world, the economies of the region, the economy around us in Barbados is changing significantly. And perhaps nothing more so than technology drives those changes, drives that change. And the estimates, in my view, should reflect that the government has connected with that reality and understands that it's not only about providing a better platform for the government to do its business, but it's about creating an environment, a world in which the young players, the youthful players of this world, whose language is that of the global, whose language is that of the technosphere, to use their skills, their instincts, their impulses, to develop themselves and by extension, therefore, to develop this economy. Technology in this world today, in my view, is a significant instrument for leveling the playing field between developing countries, developing economies, and developed economies. Technology can serve to us the advantage of us competing with people in the developed world. It therefore has the potential for foreign exchange earnings. And all I'm saying, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that when I look to these estimates, I don't see sufficiently reflected an attempt to convince us that the government has fully embraced the fact that coming with the presence of technology, there is increased opportunity and increased capacity for the Barbados economy to rise to newer heights. That's all I'm saying. We need to encourage these and facilitate these new starts. And the honorable member, again from St. George, when he and his team sat in the well, made reference to the numbers of persons who would have been benefiting from the trust loans, which is a good thing. We need to hear more fully the other side of the story as to what have been the outcomes, not with respect to one or two or three, but if you talk about 3,000 loans, you should be in a position to say, of these 3,000 loans, these numbers of businesses started, and here's where these have gone, and here's where these have gone, and here's where these are going, to show us in a substantive way the efficacy, the effectiveness of the program. That is what, to me, is important, knowing in a more fulsome fashion what has been the outcome thus far, and if it has been said before, it bears repeating.
Member for St. George South.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I rise again on a point of order.
Point of order.
The honorable member again is misleading the chamber. During the presentation again in the estimates, we articulated clearly how many jobs were created, within which sectors they were created in, manufacturing, services, we spoke on tourism, the cultural industry, and for the honorable member to rise again in this chamber to seek to mislead the public that he has no indication as to where these jobs have gone or where they are going is clearly misleading this lower chamber. Well, seeking to, because the honorable members in this chamber are wise and they know different. But the public must be aware that the honorable member is clearly misleading the chamber. The honorable member asked for statistics with respect to the trust loan fund and how many persons receive loans and how many businesses are indeed active. And those figures are available to the member.
I can understand what your point of view, but that's his opinion. So it's difficult for me to rule if it was a point of order or not, but it is his opinion. Continue, member.
Thank you. I'll raise a question which I raised during the committee component of this debate. And I think it bears repeating. When are we going to, as a state, as a government, insofar as is practicable, when are we going to put some pressure on the banking system to help capitalize the entrepreneurial effort in Barbados? If you want to change a culture, you have significantly to attack the impediments to that culture that you want to see introduced. If you want to change a culture, you must input significantly into the effort. Now, the honorable member who just spoke is suggesting that through his ministry, that meaningful contribution, input is being made. And I asked the question, I think it was the honorable member himself when he led his team to the House, as well as someone else. When are we going to seek to put some pressure on the traditional banking sector to help to facilitate this type of development in Barbados? The banking sector is happy to give capital facilitation to the big players. The big players are fairly narrowly focused in their interests and do not take an enterprising step unless they are supported by some government prop, whether it is a contract or a concession. The smaller players shout loudly that lament, that the doors of the bank or the vaults of the bank, whichever is more appropriate, are closed to them and their approaches. And I just wonder if it is not possible that some pressure is brought to bear on the banking system. I know central banks have a certain measure of influence as to what obtains in the traditional financial central banking sector. I know central banks take a cue from the government. Our history, perhaps in more recent times, is that the central bank has acted as servants of the administration. But the fact remains, we cannot have an impulse which is nascent to our people, that we want to move from being in the employee class to being a part of the employer class, to being a part of the capital class, and the banking sector not feel easily disposed to facilitating that. Now, we have known many black businesses, black-led businesses, black-led, I'm not talking pencils, black-led businesses in Barbados that have failed, folded, some for other reasons apart from that. But the stories are multiple and many. That is part of the reason too, that there's not the ready access to capital, either because you don't wear the right color in your skin, you don't represent the right class, your business is not of the type that traditionally we have supported, we are not prepared to risk it on you. Now, can pressure be put over the banking sector to change that, to alter that mindset? Is government prepared to shift its own position on these matters and to bring itself to a place where, beyond providing small capital access windows, whether they're fund access or trust loans, can government make a shift to guaranteeing before the central banking system, the traditional banking system, guaranteeing the loan applications of smaller, non-traditional businesses to the extent that the banks feel a greater degree of comfort in taking risk upon these emerging enterprises. I am speaking, Mr. Deputy Speaker, about a changing of the orientation and the culture obtaining a wrong in the Barbados economy and the contribution of an estimates document, the contribution of, the relevance of estimates figures to that objective. And I'm saying that when I look at these estimates, I don't sufficiently see that reflected strongly enough. Now, there's some things about the numbers there that raise some questions with me. In the document, I see a projection for a $46 million increase in property taxes. Now, you seem surprised, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And if I'm wrong, I'm sure I'll be corrected. I seem to see represented there an increase of some $46 million in property taxes. Now, this is always a subject area that is hotly debated. Property taxes perhaps do not so much impact the already defined and mentioned underclass in Barbados. And perhaps as things stand today, even the average working class fellow is not impacted. But it is the interests of the middle class in this particular instance and respect upon which we focus. There have been negative impacts upon the fortunes of the middle class. We lament in the last recent years, you can go back 12 years and cover the last period of the last administration. You can look back at the last 2 years. You can even go beyond that. The story is one in which the middle class has suffered some impact, negatively so, on their fortunes. The removal of a lot of the credits previously afforded with respect to income tax returns and filings, property tax itself, other charges which have been introduced, some of them recently. All of these things have taken a toll upon the middle class in Barbados. Now, if you have an increase of almost $50 million in taxes projected in these numbers, then you have to query what will happen with respect to the impact upon middle-class Barbados. I will imagine, Mr. Speaker.
What do you raise?
On a simple point of order,
Yeah.
as it relates to the taxes on property that the honourable member is speaking of. Now, he talks about a $46 million increase. That would be so if he was looking at a comparison between the approved estimates for 2020-21 versus 1920. But that 1920 estimate was in fact revised not to 186 million, but in fact to 215 million. So what that 1920, so he's comparing the previous year to this year to the following year. Right, so 2019-2020 is what he was comparing it to. But remember, that has actually been revised upward because there was a reclassification of the estimates of the property tax.
So you're
that's
saying
why
that there's no increase?
So the increase is not as large as he said. So it is not, in fact, that number. It is only, in fact, a $16 million, $18 million increase, and not 46.
So it's 18 million,
yeah,
and
because
not
there was a
46.
revision. Yes.
Remember, are you prepared to accept that?
I am prepared to accept that what he represented is true, but I am insisting that what I said is also correct. Now, the honourable member for Christchurch West can choose to look at these matters as he desires. And all he is saying is, we are anticipating that this year we will receive X amount of dollars in property tax. Next, that's 2020, 2021. He is saying, whereas in 1920 we projected X, we actually got Y. So the difference between those two is about 20 million. I am insisting that you projected last year X amount of dollars from property taxes, and your program, therefore, was premised on that. This year, you're projecting 46 million. You're projecting $46 million
Mr. Deputy Speaker, on a
more,
point of order.
and therefore, your
Deputy
program
Speaker, on a
is
point of order.
anticipated to
Member
be
is on a-
premised
Mr.
on
Deputy
that.
Speaker, on a point
On a
of
point of order.
order, I cannot sit here and let the honourable member mislead, he's not misleading the House, but mislead the public. Because the reason
You have to
of the
mislead the House
difference,
first.
and he has to understand the reason of the difference is certain things happened. We had an amnesty, and during that amnesty, a lot of people who had not paid tax for a long time because they had penalties and interest associated had then come in and paid because they had an opportunity to pay without the penalties and interest. So because of the programs that we put in place, that encouraged a lot of people to come and pay who otherwise would not have paid. And what that did is that bumped up the number, so therefore we could not anticipate the number of people without seeing it. This is why the increase has been here. This is why the numbers are different.
The man is proving my point.
Continue.
I thank him for the intervention, but the smile from the all member St. James North shows that he agrees with what I'm about to say. And that is that the honourable member for Christchurch West is substantiating the point I'm trying to make. He's substantiating the point I'm trying to make. You got some property tax that you didn't expect last time because certain people came in to pay. You budgeted for X and you got Y.
So the-
You are now this year budgeting for B. That's what you're budgeting for, B. When I compare the budget of this year, B, to last year, X, I see your $46 million increase. Is
Is this revenue or expenditure?
his revenue, Mr. Deputy Speaker. His revenue. I can understand that you're confused.
On the point of, yeah.
Raise on a point of order.
Yeah.
We are sworn not to mislead Parliament and by extension the people. The fact of the matter is that the honourable member for Christchurch West is indeed correct. Because how the honourable leader of the opposition failed and contextualized this matter was that the government raking in all of this 46, as he said, close to $50 million more in revenue. The reality, sir, is that the rate hasn't gone up for this year, sir. In other words, 2020-21, there will be no increase in property tax. As the Prime Minister has said in this Parliament, sir, there will be no increase in taxes in this budget, sir. So the honourable member has to, and he's sworn to this, sir, not to mislead the Parliament, because he phrased it in a way that you're now getting all these more money from middle-income people who are under pressure anyway, sir. The honourable member for Christchurch West is correct. And there's been more efficient collection of taxes, sir.
All right, point well
due to the
taken.
wisdom of this government.
Point
That is
taken.
all, sir.
Point taken. Continue.
I don't know how my two colleagues so easily miss a rather simple point.
My Joe. Oh,
You, Mr. Deputy Speaker, have done these estimates, and you are saying to us, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that in the year ahead, 2020 to 2021, which starts 1st of April,
Right.
you will get $46 million in property tax.
You're saying that the projection?
$46 million more. That is the projection for the year ahead. That is the projection for the year ahead.
From your calculation?
46 in the book. $46 million more is being projected in property taxes. Now, if you tell me you plan to improve collections, fine, if that's your explanation. All I'm saying is your numbers say you will get $46 million more. $46 million more. Mr. Deputy Speaker, let me reduce.
Go ahead, go
Let me
ahead.
reduce this to simple numbers, yeah?
Yeah.
Last year, 2019 to 2020, you said to us, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that property taxes in this year, 2019 to 2020, will be $2.
Right.
You come this year, 2020 to 2021, and you say to us, property taxes for this year will be $48 million. Mr. Speaker, is that a $46 million increase?
Based on what you have just said.
Based on the numbers in the book. Based on the numbers in the book. It's based on the numbers in the book. These are numbers which are being made up. These numbers are in the book.
I just continue.
No, Mr. Speaker, the argument is not how much you actually got in. The argument is what you budgeted last time and what you budgeted next time. And it shows $46 million more. And if it shows $46 million more, I am entitled to ask,
Mr. Deputy Speaker.
are you going to improve collections
Mr.
or are
Deputy
you going to
Speaker.
increase property taxes?
Mr.
And
Deputy
if you
Speaker.
are going to increase
Oh, just
property
a minute.
taxes,
On a point
then you will
of
do so to the
order,
further
Mr.
detriment
Deputy
of the
Speaker.
middle
Two members on the
class.
seat.
Mr.
Two
Deputy
members.
Speaker,
The member
on
for
a point of
Christchurch
order.
West.
The
Christchurch
honourable member
West.
continues to mislead the House. He clearly does not understand the difference between approved and revised. And let us then take his incredible or incredulous argument to its logical conclusion. That would mean then that the tax revenue of 2019-2020 approved was 2.889, whereas revised was 2.6. So that means that it was $200 million less. You have to understand there's a difference between the approved and the revised. And for the honourable member to rely on the approved and not the actual, which is the revised, is clearly designed to sensationalize and to mislead the public of Barbados.
Okay.
All right,
Member.
Mr. Speaker, I really don't want to take the time to get into all of these details. But if you look at Table 13 in
Table
your
what?
estimates,
Table.
1.3, line 503, taxes on property, you will see, Mr. Speaker, that in 2020 to 2021, you are projecting to receive $233 million in property taxes. That is the year coming. That is what you hope to get. Therefore, your policies will revolve around that. Correct? If you look at the year 2019 to 2020, you will see that what was requested and approved was $186 million, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, those are the numbers I am dealing with.
Let's continue, please.
Mr. Speaker, your revised numbers to which the two honorable gentlemen refer, your revised numbers speak to what you have achieved in the current year coming to an end. That is what you've achieved in the current year coming to an end,
Yes.
based on your policies for last year and your efficiency in collection and the readiness of people to pay their taxes. That is what that refers to. What you are now putting in the estimates for next year represents the number around which your policies will be evolved. Correct, Mr. Speaker? And speak to your efforts to collect that money. I do not know where these two honorable gentlemen are coming from, but I am simply saying to you, last year you planned to get X amount of dollars in property taxes. However much you got is a different story. This is what you planned, and your policies were based on that. Your efforts were aimed at achieving that. Next year, you plan this. So I'm questioning, where are the policies and what are the policies that will take you to that figure that you are putting in these estimates which this Parliament will approve? That's all I'm asking. I don't know where these two honorable gentlemen come from, except that they come out of Christchurch West and St. George North,
St. George.
St. James North. So if they're done, Mr. Speaker, could I go on?
Go ahead, please.
Because
Let's
that's all
proceed.
I'm asking. And I'm saying that if you are expecting increased property taxes, you have to tell us whether it's simply a matter of better collection efforts, if it is a greater measure of faith placed in the Barbadian taxpayer to pay his property taxes, the Barbadian landowner, or if it implies that there will be some increase in the rate of taxes. The Honourable Member St. James North said that the Honourable Prime Minister said in this chamber that there'll be no new taxes. I don't know that that is true. I know I've heard it outside of this chamber. Property tax is not a new tax. Property tax will not be a new tax. It has been with us for the time of immemorial. You therefore can increase an old tax. It's not a new tax, words are funny things, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But that's another story that we're going to get to sooner or later. So $46 million more. And I'm glad that the honorable gentlemen who spoke, who rose to their feet multiple times, are enthusiastic about paying that tax and are ready to cough up when the time comes. Because the burden will fall heaviest on people like them. Not people like yourself, not people like myself, people like them. Now, there's a $200 million difference that was yielded to corporation taxes. $200 million difference yielded to corporation taxes in Barbados as a result of the corporation tax adjustments. Questions flow from that. You give $200 million to the corporate sector, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it has to come from somewhere. If it's incoming out of Bridgetown, it must be coming out of St. George. In Workman's, that's where you reside, Mr. Deputy Speaker, or Government Hill. You see, when you give it to the boys in Bridgetown, or wherever they are located, you have to take it from the boys in Bell Gully, in Bredinsill, in Bayland. So you yield $200 million in taxes, somebody got paid. It has to come from somewhere. And in fact, we were forewarned that there will be a shift away from these corporation taxes to taxes that hit on consumption and personal taxes. Yeah, $200 million. So the question is, you yield $200 million to the corporate sector. What is the net effect on employment? Have we seen any signs of that increased incidence of employment in Barbados? It is all right to give the private sector this and to give the private sector that. We have to do that. But when we do that, we anticipate that the private sector will show some returns in kind. The honourable member...
And the point of order, member for Christchurch West.
The honourable member is making the same mistake again. He is looking at approved versus revised. And if you look on page 3 of part 1, in the approved, it is $1 billion versus 1 billion versus 794 million. But in revised, it's 793 versus 794. A change of just $1 million. For the honourable member to suggest that there's a loss of $200 million is again misleading the House. And I would ask that that be struck from the record. He continues to mislead the House with the same mistake over and over again.
But I don't understand that, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The government, with its own principal voice, has conceded that we're giving this money to the corporate sector. We are adjusting our corporate tax rates in Barbados to bring us in compliance with the international community. That has been said. That has been accepted as policy. It has been acknowledged that this will create a gap, Mr. Speaker, a revenue gap for the government, and it has to be made up somehow. Mr. Deputy Speaker, you want to go and make reference to the budget of last year, and therefore we will see adjustments. Personal income tax, we will see adjustments on consumption tax, we will see adjustment of VAT. Go check the record. The government, by its own voice, has said that. All I'm saying, if you make that policy change with respect to corporate tax revenues in Barbados, then it has to be made up. It has to be made up from somewhere. And if the boys in Bridgetown don't have to pay, then the fellas in Bayland and in Brereton and in Bush Hall will have to pay. That's all I'm saying. Is that not true, Mr. Deputy Speaker? Somebody, if government revenue reflects a gap of that magnitude, somebody has to pay. If the corporate world ain't paying it, then Citizen John, Citizen Joe must pay, because it is a significant revenue gap. This is the reality. So the question is, when you give the boys in Bridgetown all of these concessions, what is the net effect on increased employment that we see? Do we see a rising of the numbers? Is that what the central bank is reporting to us? That employment levels are increasing. And therefore, this policy is working. The fellows have a little bit more capital available to them. They are therefore employing a few more people. I heard the same honorable member for Christchurch West in this place, in repeated instances, even in this debate, suggest we give the private sector a break. We expect them to step up to the plate. We give an increase in the government sector, public sector, with respect to a small wage improvement. We expect the private sector to follow suit. That was the honorable member's reasoning. I'm simply saying, yes, I agree with that. If the government shows and takes the lead and give a 5% increase in salary and wages to public sector workers, maybe the private sector can consider doing the same, if no more. And especially in a context where you give them a concession of $200 million. Mr. Speaker, is that so hard to understand? Is that so hard to internalize?
On the point of order, Mr. Deputy
Member for
Speaker.
Christchurch East Central.
The honourable member certainly is misleading the chamber from a number of fronts, sir. First of all, the government of Barbados, this government of Barbados, did not give to anybody, as he is asserting, $200 million with respect to any cash injection. Let me remind the honourable member that, first of all, when this government came to office, we increased corporate rates from 25%, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to 30%. There was an increase with respect to personal income tax temporarily during the course of 2018, sir. And then subsequently in the budget of last year, sir, the Prime Minister, having announced the convergence in December of 2018, came to this honorable chamber, sir, and announced a series of cuts with respect to personal income tax that would take effect, sir, from April 1st of last year. And therefore, the difference between what was approved, sir, in terms, sorry, not approved, the difference between, yes, in terms of what was approved and what was revised reflected clearly, sir, the intention of the government to relieve ordinary Barbadians from a personal income tax perspective. As a matter of fact, sir, the second round of those adjustments came into effect January of this year, and Barbadians across the length and breadth of Barbados are seeing a much larger increase in disposable income going forward. But let me say, sir, the actual revenues collected, and I think the member is seeking to distort the chamber, because the taxes on incomes and profits, sir, don't reflect only corporation tax, sir. It is incomes with respect to the income tax that Barbadians pay, plus corporate taxes, which make up the amalgam. And therefore, as we are collecting the revenues now, sir, there is no significant difference between the corporate tax that we collected in the previous financial year, sir, and the corporation tax that we are collecting this year. And therefore, the honourable member, in seeking to say that this government gave to people in Broad Street, sir, $200 million is grossly misleading to the chamber and does not reflect the reality on the ground in Barbados, sir. Thank you.
All right, member, proceed.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, you know, the more things change, the more they remain the same. I never said anybody. I never said anything about any cash injection. I am talking about concessions due to the change in the tax policy and the tax structure, which allowed the corporate sector to benefit to a certain extent as reflected in these numbers. The Minister of Finance, the Honorable Prime Minister herself said that that revenue gap would be made up. That revenue gap would be made up by reference to consumer taxes, VAT, etc., etc. That is on the record. All I'm doing is questioning the numbers here. And I'm simply asking this. If you give a tax break, a tax concession to the private sector, especially of this magnitude, I am entitled to ask the question, has it made any difference to the employment numbers in Barbados? Mr. Deputy Speaker, that's a question you would ask, though you would not ask it here and now. That's a question you would ask. So I have to ask it. I have to ask further. What has been the increased level of investment on the part of the private sector? Having benefited from a shifting of the tax rates, are we seeing any signs of increased private sector investment on the ground in Barbados, considering the conversion of the tax rate, reducing their tax burden? It is all right to stand up and say we moved it from 25 to 30, but that was almost just bookwork, because in short order, a matter of weeks, it was reduced back down to a ceiling of about 5. That's the reality. Those are budgeted numbers. Those documents are documents of this House. Question, therefore, is fairly justified. What has been the level of increased investment seen on the ground in Barbados as a result of that benefit which they got? Now, I have heard this talk about no new taxes. That's all right, no new taxes. Now, VAT is not a new tax. You know, you could increase the rate of VAT and not have a new tax in Barbados. You got a new tax rate. So I want clear language. Clear language. Don't say there'll be no new taxes. Say there'll be no increase in taxes anywhere. That's the clear language that we need to hear. When I hear that, I'll stop harping on this. You can increase the VAT rates without introducing a new tax. And that's the reality. It's reality. There's several existing taxes. You can increase without increasing new taxes. Now, when the government says no new taxes, I take them at their word. That is me. That is me. But I still think you need to say in no uncertain and in very clear terms to the people of Barbados that you will not increase tax at all this year in Barbados. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, you have been in politics long enough to know that there's something called user fees. You don't have to increase taxes, you know. You can increase user fees for services. And already in the well of this House, I heard one or two members, ministers, honorable ministers, refer to increased user fees for services under their ministry. Do you recall that, Mr. Deputy Speaker?
No, I don't, really.
Well, I do. And if that is not true, I would expect that one of them would stand up and challenge me. But I heard that from a couple of ministers in the well of this House already this week. Anticipate increased fees for aspects of service provided by their ministries. If that is not true, let an honorable man stand to his feet, or woman that is, and say it is not true, but I heard that. And therefore, justifiably therefore, I think I asked the question, even if you don't see increased taxes in any way, or new taxes, Will we see user fees increase in any respect for some of the services provided by the government of Barbados? Already you've done it with respect to the post office, postal service. And that's pre these estimates. And that was a pretty hefty increase. Maybe in the scheme of things does not provide the level of revenue that causes one to be staggered, but it is illustrative of what I'm talking about, that you can have increased fees for services without having increased taxes. And those increased fees for services can be equally as burdensome to people who are already burdened by heavy levels of taxation, and some already applied user fees, not least of which is the $3.50, that's what it is, bus fare, not least of all that. Healthcare levy and all of that. These things have been, these healthcare contribution, these things have been introduced already. So are we looking down this year, not at new taxes, but increased user fees in any respect? I think that's a question I will want to ask. You look at these budget figures, Mr. Deputy Speaker, you will see they reflect a $50 million more in non-tax revenue. You understand that? No new tax there. That is not a tax revenue. That is non-tax revenue. But with the details with respect to these non-tax revenues, because it's increasing by $50 million non-tax revenues. Do you know what that represents, Mr. Deputy Speaker? I don't, other than that it is revenue derived by the government for the public purse, without reference to what we call formally taxes. But it's $50 more in non-tax revenue. Our concern, as we're looking at numbers, I like to be fair and look at both sides. I look at these estimates, I see an increase being proposed for public order and public safety of only $9 million. $9 million. I remember last year I raised this issue. I raised it again. Barbados has changed. The climate in society has changed. There's some dynamics now with which we have to deal and upon which we have to get a further grip. And I don't raise this to be critical. I have not joined my voice to the many voices that have called for this and have called for that and the removal of this person or that person. I don't go places foolishly. But I strongly do believe that unless we protect our reputation, unless we protect and preserve a reputation of safety and security and a place where people feel comfortable whether they are home or out to work, if we don't do that, whatever limited gains we have achieved become a subject to serious threat. I therefore think that $9 million increase in that line for public safety and public order is small. Yes, it's there with health. Yes, it's there with education in terms of the increases in the overall votes. But this matter of public order and public safety, and dare I say, and I say so with a sense of dread, that if things go wrong, go south with the management of this COVID threat, we are going to be staring down the barrel of further issues in public safety and public order in Barbados. And I suppose that will be dealt with if it does emerge. But even as these estimates stand, before the threat of COVID, $9 million more for public safety and public order to me is minuscule. And I remember when I raised this concern last time, I was told that there's money spent in the budget, in the estimates, money provided towards public order and public safety, though which necessarily not captured in that line, but maybe captured in other lines or under other ministries. But at the end of the day, $9 million more, $9 million more for public safety and public order to me is minuscule, not with the crime trends that we are observing in Barbados today. I believe that there's serious need to relook that. And I say so not to offer any criticism. I say so to express the concern of a Barbadian that we have to preserve properly this environment in which we now live and work, this environment into which we invite investors, this environment into which we invite tourists. We need to make sure that tourists, investors, and residents, all alike, are properly protected, that our reputation is enhanced. Beyond being preserved, it is enhanced in the eyes of the world so that Barbados remains an attractive place. Else all we do falls prey to threat and those who are criminally bent on pursuing their own interests in illegal ways. Now, Mr. Speaker, there's some other numbers in here that cause me to question exactly what we're doing.
Mr.
Because-
Deputy Speaker,
What about the rice?
I raise on point of order. I thought long and hard before intervening because I don't want us to give fuel to the Honourable Leader of the Opposition's thoughts, which we could possibly be doing. I mean, he seems to be phasing out already. But I mean, the fact of the matter, sir, and I really don't want the records of this Parliament, the highest forum in the land, to be tainted with misleading statements. The fact of the matter is that this Parliament has on many occasions within the course of last year and of this current year, sir, and even as recently since we moved to this location, sir, brought supplementals, voting funds for law and order, sir. So for the Honourable Member to be giving the public, well, this House first, sir, and by this House himself, sir, because he isn't fooling anybody else in this House. But the public, the feeling that we are not voting monies to maintain order and public security and national security in this country is misleading, sir. 2 weeks ago, a supplementary was brought in this House, or last week, voting additional revenue, sir, for law and order. So to look at it within the narrow context of only voting 9 million votes, is quite frankly, sir, a dishonour to this Parliament, sir, which, as I said, I thought long and hard, but I felt really it was my duty, sir, as obviously a member of Cabinet.
So you're saying there's more than 9 million?
Sir,
Okay.
the supplementaries
Okay.
have to be taken in the context. So you can't be misleading Parliament by saying it's only this when we regularly vote supplementaries.
Okay, your
And-
point
and
has been
did it
taken.
Up to last week or 2 weeks ago.
You accept that there's
You
more
know,
than 9?
Mr. Deputy, again, sorry?
You accept there's more than 9?
If I accept that, there's more than 9?
There were supplementaries.
Mr. Speaker, I am sorry that you have allowed the Honourable Member St. James North to mislead you. And in a court of law, he would have defeated himself in his own case that he was trying. If you say to me that during this last year, we have come here for supplementary for this and supplementary for that, you are saying to me that last year, when the leader of the opposition questioned the amount of money you're asking for law and order, he was right, because it proved not to be sufficient, and you came back for supplementaries. The judge would have instructed him to sit down. Now, if you tell me that you came here for supplementary for this, and for supplementary for that, and supplementary for that, during the course of this year, you are saying to me that when the Honourable Leader of the Opposition said last year this money is not enough for law and order, he was right, because you had to come back for more. And all I am saying here is, and I'm not saying the government has not been spending money on law and order. They have been, and I have supported every measure they have brought here to improve the law and order and justice architecture in Barbados. All I'm saying is, with what we now face, to me, this $9 million increase is not enough for law and order. That's what we're saying, Mr. Speaker. That's all I'm saying. And what will happen is you have to come back again for supplementaries, which will prove that the man was right when he said it in the first place. Mr. Speaker, on the issue of debt. Mr. Speaker, on the issue of debt, we really need to have Barbados appraised of where we are. You know, we talk about debt to GDP. We talk about debt to GDP and how the level, the ratio has come down from 170 to about 120 now, percent of GDP and all this, and we are moving towards 60% of GDP by 2030 or 2033. That's what we say. Now, when I read the numbers here, our debt reality is the same projected as it is now. It's $10 billion. It's $10 billion, roughly, Mr. Deputy Speaker. If I'm reading these numbers wrong, please, Mr. Deputy Speaker, you tell me. Because it's $10 billion. $10 billion then. $10 billion then. $10 billion now. Movement between 7.6 and 8.6 billion domestically. A movement between 2.7 and 2.8 billion dollars in terms of foreign debt. It's about the same. Now, we have borrowed substantially to address these debt issues. We have defaulted substantially to address these debt issues. We have increased taxation. We have reduced expenditure. We have done all of this, and we are still dancing around the same figure of debt, Mr. Speaker. The reality, the numbers are there now. You can find it on page 10, I think it is, in these documents. $10 billion. $10 billion. So all the stress you put me through, all the stress you put me through as a Bajan, all the belt tightening you make me do, the taxes you increase, the user fees you employ, the default that you have applied, all of this, the debt level is about $10 billion. About the same. The numbers say that to me. I hear the honorable member of Christchurch say you don't pay down a mortgage, you won't hear.
You're not supposed to hear him.
And not supposed to hear him, but I hear him very clearly. But all I'm saying is you're dancing around the same $10 billion figure. Now, Mr. Speaker, I have to address at some point the points made. I'm coming away from those estimates and those numbers because I see I'm making a few people uncomfortable in their seats. And so I will focus for a little while on some of the points that the honorable member for Christchurch East Central made when he led the presentation earlier. He spoke, Mr. Deputy Speaker, with reference to, he spoke for about 2 hours and 15 minutes or somewhere near there, and he spoke substantially with reference to COVID-19 and its implications. Understand significant reference to that because of the reality that now faces us. But I really thought I was hearing a speech from the Minister, Honorable Minister of Health, trying to encourage and advise Bajans as to what faces us down. Now, he expressed fears of he expressed fears over the projection of a 25% tourism fall off for Barbados. And I share his fear. That is a conservative projection, quite conservative as a projection, but 25% fall off in tourism is quite substantial. If you couple that with the fact, which he also acknowledged, that tourism contributes about 40% to the GDP. And he set our circumstance in the circumstance of regional terms. Again, Mr. Speaker, and I spoke to this before, and others apart from me and before me have spoken to this, the unwisdom of the over-reliance on tourism as a chief and sometimes seemingly only driver of the economy. If It is contributing 40%. That is substantial. It is a very volatile, vulnerable, exposed industry. This present threat constituted by this pandemic, by conservative projections, will see a 25% fall off. I have heard as much as 35%. I have heard as much as 80% fall off if we reach the stage where there is a 50% fall off. That is a sorry day for Barbados. And it perhaps gives us opportunity to reflect on the unwisdom of continuing to rely on this very fickle industry. In the good days, we will do well, but it is too exposed to too frequent bad days. And therefore, maybe there's a message in this for us that we need to change course substantially, Mr. Speaker. Now, the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central also suggested that one of the threats which we face, and which would mean significant fallout perhaps for us, negative fallout for us, is in the slowdown of the manufacturing processes on which we rely. Globally, the supply chains, I believe that's what his reference was. But if there is, as there already is, clear evidence that this exists, a slackening, a slowing down of the manufacturing processes, that has issues for us. Not only with respect to the inputs that we may use here for our meager manufacturing efforts, but it has implications for the export of the imports of the things that imports of the things that are manufactured and upon which we rely in Barbados. And I was a bit taken aback when in the well of this house during these estimates, I asked the question about incentives to be provided for the faltering manufacturing sector in Barbados. I was taken aback when I was told that the days of incentives are done. My honourable friend from St. George, unfortunately now, is on St. George South, unfortunately now is on record as having said that. I want to make it clear, not St. George North. You did not say that, Mr. Deputy Speaker. You would not say that, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But it escaped, and I choose my words carefully, it escaped the lips of the Honourable Member for St. George South. The days of incentives in Barbados are done. I don't think that that is a government policy. I don't think that Cabinet has agreed on that. I don't think that Cabinet has even discussed any such thing. But out of the mouth of St. George South escapes those words, that the days of incentives in Barbados are done. Now, you will hear many speeches on that. The Honourable Member will hear many speeches on that. This is the Minister of Small Business. This is the Minister of Commerce. This is the Minister responsible for entrepreneurship. He's saying to us, he's saying to the public of Barbados, and I'm sure he did not intend to mislead us, that the days of incentives, the days of incentives in Barbados are done. I am sure, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in case you didn't hear me with the noise coming from the other side, that is not Cabinet policy. I am sure that is not government policy. I am sure that is policy coming only out of St. George South.
Did you hear that? Did you hear that as policy?
When a minister speaks to the Parliament of Barbados, I expect he's expressing policy position. He runs a ministry. He represented the ministry. He led a marvelous team here. I'm saying, I'm sure it's not cabinet policy. I'm sure that is not, I would hate to think it is government policy. So it has to be policy coming out of St. George South. It has to be policy coming out of the mouth of the Minister of Commerce, the Minister of Small Business, the Minister of Entrepreneurship, that the days of incentives in Barbados are done. I heard that, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I did hear that, and I hear no contradiction coming from the other side. Couldn't believe my ears at the time. Couldn't believe my ears at the time. But if the honourable member did not say that, he's free to rise to his feet, as he has several instances in this speech already. The honourable member is free to stand to his feet and contradict me on that if he did not say that. He is not so quick in this moment to his feet, Mr. Deputy Speaker. He is not so quick to his feet in this moment. His knees have now become feeble.
Am I hearing repetition? Are you repeating yourself?
First time I've mentioned knees, Mr. Deputy Speaker. No repetition here.
Just proceed.
His knees are now feeble. His tongue is now still.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I tried not to.
Madam?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I tried not to.
Member for St. George South, go ahead.
On a point of order and on a point of elucidation, the honourable member, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the honourable member during the estimates.
What's the point of order, sir?
I rose on a point of order and a point of elucidation.
Go ahead.
The honourable member is misleading the public. That's the point of order that I raise on. And I will seek further to explain the comment. The honourable member posed the question, what are we focusing on? What are we doing in building out the manufacturing sector? And we said that there are three pillars: innovation, entrepreneurship, and indeed an ICT platform. And we went further to allow the honourable member to understand that the manufacturing sector falls under the purview of the member, First St. Michael North. And we said to the honourable member in the chamber that whereas in the past we focus heavily on incentives,
Right.
in an effort to transform this economy, we cannot rely solely on incentives. We have to build up the manufacturing sector through entrepreneurship, innovation, and an ICT platform. So the honourable member can seek to mislead the public because the public knows better. And soon the honourable member, fixated on this whole aspect of incentives, this government will demonstrate to the public what we intend to do as it relates to a policy initiative to address the matter that the member is seeking to mislead the public on. I thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
All right. Well said. Continue.
And I really want to get on, Mr. Deputy
Yeah,
Speaker.
I think he has clarified
But
the
you would
position.
no, he has not clarified. I beg your pardon.
Yes.
You will notice that the honourable member never said, he never disputed that he said those words. The days of incentives in Barbados are done. Are done.
I thought he was saying in the process of time, the incentives will come to an end. But as far as the policy, I think you want to
Deputy-
further clarify. I don't think you need to further clarify that,
Madam Deputy Speaker, just a note, I hope, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it
Yes.
is my wish and my belief that the good member for St. Michael West, the whole aspect of the evening, he misinterpreted every single thing that was said in this chamber. And I hope he doesn't do that on a Sunday.
But you will get your chance to speak. So you'll get your chance to speak. Continue.
Be careful where you tread, Honorable Member for St. George South, because you now cross the borders and enter into a different realm. Be very careful. There are those before you who have done that and have found to their pain that that's not the place to go.
Okay, member. Don't let us personalize these things.
No, that ain't touch me. I'm warning you.
All right, just
for your own
proceed.
good.
Just
that has
proceed.
nothing to do with this debate. The point is,
Let's proceed.
The point is, Mr. Deputy Speaker,
Yes.
I will, until you get it. The honorable member said the days of incentives in Barbados are done. Let him deny that. Let him deny that.
I further clarify.
Say, I did not say it.
Okay, let's proceed because I think he explained what he really meant to say.
You think so?
Yes. Let's proceed.
Let's
please.
get on.
Let's proceed. He's an honorable man.
A
Let's
very
proceed.
honorable man. He's an honorable man. And I pray blessings on him. Absolutely. Always do. Around 3 o'clock every morning for all of you. As long as I'm awake. He does hear prayers from bad people, though. Some interesting things said. Some interesting things said further by the honorable member for Christchurch East Central. There's a saying in politics, you never waste a good crisis. You're familiar with that?
Never made a good credit.
You never waste a good crisis. And there are those who live in a world and make only a political reference to their experiences in that world. And I'm not suggesting that is true of the Honorable Member for Christchurch East Central. I don't think so. In other words, there's some people who only see politics in everything. They don't see beyond the political, and I don't think that of the Honorable Member for Christchurch East Central. But there's a saying, you never waste a good crisis in politics. The Honorable Member used some words today, and here I go again. When you use people's own words, you get in trouble with people. And the Honorable Member said today, this crisis presents us with a unique opportunity. And there's some who will think, and I'm not suggesting that he does, there's some who will think that this crisis presents the government with a unique opportunity to divert somewhat away from the stringency of the IMF extended fund facility arrangements into which we found ourselves. There are those who will think that this is a tremendous opportunity for government to find a space of greater relaxation, to spend a little more. We'll find the opportunity to press the IMF for a little bit more funding so that we go beyond the 290 million we got in the first place. We wanted more to start with. And our circumstances then did not allow it. Circumstances now may have brought our reality to a place where we can put a case in the context, perhaps, of a regional approach to the institution to find greater levels of foreign exchange input into our economy and to find greater space for spending, perhaps to ease the burden on our people. That is the crass political way of thinking about it. I don't associate that thinking with the Honorable Member for Christchurch East Central, although there are those here who will stand to their feet and say so, or go from here and say so. I repeat, I don't associate that crass type of thinking to the honorable member when he used those words that this presents a unique opportunity. But the reality is that we will perhaps, if we're successful in our approach to the IMF, along with the regional approach to the financial institutions of the world at this time, we may find that breathing space that may help to ease the burden on some people. We will find that extra input of foreign reserves that will help to alleviate the pain that would have been caused by a persistent lack of growth in the Barbados economy, export growth in the Barbados economy. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I think the honorable member's words I would want better to understand in that context and not as a crass political statement. On the PDP side, party which I have the honor to lead, we anticipated that this present threat would bring us to a position where, as a country, we can make that appeal for greater funding, and we can make that appeal for a relaxation of the stringency which would allow the government to spend more. So we anticipated that, and does not come as a surprise. My one caution to the government is that the government not, in the event that we feel some significant impact of COVID by its presence in Barbados, use that as an explanation or an excuse for any shortcoming in economic outturns in Barbados. Because I also believe, and the party that I lead believes, we have said this from before, that prior to COVID, we were going to be embarking on a period of pain and greater austerity, and that Barbados will live long days before we came out on the brighter side of this situation. So we would not want to hear it sounded across the corridors of Barbados that it is COVID that brought these burdens upon us, even though the threat is there to intensify the burden and to multiply our sorrows. And I hope I have been clear in expressing that. So the honorable member told us that this is an opportunity for the government to use a stimulus in capital spending in Barbados. That is to be perfectly understood. If this present threat becomes more of a sinister reality, then of course it will hit our economy hard because of the way the economy is profiled. Yeah? Dependent on imports, dependent on tourism, many jobs in the tourism sector, in the retail sector, which is a heavily import sector, and it will hit our economy hard. And therefore, the stimulus in capital spending should help to sustain a level of economic activity, spending by the state. Now, the current circumstances suggest that we have to deal with a challenge that we have had for some time, and that is the challenge of private capital investment in Barbados. For years, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we have heard this project will start soon. This project will start 2 months from now, especially tourism-related infrastructural development. This project will start next 3 months. This project will start by December. And we have been, in each instance, disappointed not to realize those starts. This government is saying to Barbados that over the next 3 months or so, there are a number of projects which we expect to see started in Barbados that will help with the capital spending and therefore circulation further of money in the economy. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, my understanding is that undertakings with respect to the startup of these projects, these undertakings were received before the onset of the threat of COVID. So the question is, since the threat, since the downturn in global economic activity, since the impact on tourism-related activity and investment, my question is, what of these projects? And will we really see the startup of these projects in the interim period? Government has said, and in a public forum, that they are in a position to put pressure on these investors because they have been granted concessions. And if they do not proceed with the startups in the given period of 3 months, those concessions can be revoked. That is pressure. Government has facilitated through planning approvals, I imagine, the startup of these projects. But the question has to be entertained, is that will they materialize, will they be realized given the existing circumstances of the moment? Now, I have to take issue with the honourable member for Christchurch East Central on a couple of things, though. He projected, perhaps, if this threat of COVID becomes real for us, he projected at most about 20 cases in Barbados. And he based this on a measure drawing reference to the China situation, where they've got about 81,000 cases in a population of virtually 1.5 billion people. You had only 81 cases. He extrapolated to suggest that Barbados, if you only got 81,000 in a population such as China's, Barbados is likely to be 17 or so, at most 20. I understood what he was saying. I didn't like what he was saying. I think in an effort to give a sense of calm, which the government must do, it was a step overboard to compare using that model. Because if you look at population density, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and immediately he said it, it struck me and I checked. Population density for China is 150 people per square kilometer. Let's say square miles for ease of reference. 150 people per square kilometer. Population density of Barbados, 670 people per square kilometer. You understand the significant difference in that information? You can't say China has 81,000, which sounds like a lot, in a population of 1.4 billion, which is a lot. If they only have 81,000 in that population, then it's not really a lot. But when you check population density, you do a comparison. On every square kilometer, they have 150 people living. Every square kilometer in Barbados, we have 668 people living. This is a far more densely per capita or per person population in the Barbados context. This virus is spread by people contact. You understand the implications of that, Mr. Deputy Speaker? It is spread by people contact, by the transfer of droplets, as we understand it, from an infected person, a lot of the time to an unsuspecting other. And in a population density of 670 per square kilometer, compared to 150 per square kilometer, you cannot use that measure to suggest, even though your intention is good, to suggest a relative degree of safety. We have to make sure that Barbadians are confronted and faced with the truth of the matter, that if this virus manifests its presence here, we're really faced with a sinister evil to which we shall have to treat. The honourable member further said, and again in an effort to allay the fears of Barbadians, and I have to disagree with him on this as well, even though again I understand. He made a reference to the statement of the governor of New York. New York has about 8 million, 9 million people, as he rightly acknowledged. The governor said we have 600 critical care beds. 600 critical care beds in New York. You can't say that and then juxtapose it against the Barbados situation, where we're striving to have 120 or 150 in a population of only 250,000, so to speak. You can't do that. If you understand that what the government was expressing was a lament that New York only, with 8, 9 million people, New York City only has 600 critical care beds. It was a lament he was expressing. He was expressing a serious fear of a nightmarish experience because of the presence of COVID. He wasn't saying we're good, we have 600 critical care beds. He's saying we are in a desperate situation. And in fact, he was predicting that they will face a nightmare if this thing is not managed quickly and carefully. So we can't put that information out there to allay fears at home, because when you do the comparison, the reference you use falls far short of getting you there. I don't like to speak like this, believe it or not, but it is necessary. This is the role I have here. It's a position I have to take. Now, you cannot tell the Barbadian public, in an effort to allay their fears and to make them feel more reassured, you cannot tell the Barbadian public that we are all right with respect to the capacity that we have, that we're working on building up capacity, physical facilities. You can't tell the Barbadian public that to allay their fears and make reference to a region of Sierra Leone where they had 2 doctors to 1 million people. You can't do that and say that we have 600 doctors in Barbados. That does not necessarily mean that you have the capacity. And that we have nurses in Barbados. That does not mean that you have the capacity to deal with this threat, if it becomes real and a nightmare for us. You can't do that to attempt to allay fears. 600 doctors is a number. You have to make reference to training. You can't be talking about the number of nurses we have when in the normal course of things, we always admit that we have a shortage of nurses and we're not trying to import some. You can't say on the left side of the mouth or on Tuesday of the week that we don't have enough nurses, and on the right side of the mouth, on the Wednesday of the week, say that we are satisfied with the capacity we have enough. Capacity has to do with trained professionals. I don't know that all nurses are trained to deal with this thing, or doctors. So capacity has to do with training. Capacity has to do with facilities. Capacity has to do with systems of communication and transport. Capacity has to do with how your population responds to the threat and the extent to which you're able to persuade them to follow the protocols. All this capacity. So I have humbly to disagree with the honourable member when he tries to calm our fears by saying that we have the capacity. We hope to have the capacity, and that this virus does not show itself in its worst manifestation. We hope to be able to prevent it from coming. And if it does come, we hope to be able to contain its spread. And if unfortunately it must affect a few, thank you. If unfortunately it must affect a few, then we want to be able to know that we can treat to them. And we're trying to get there. And that is what you have to say. In the United States, the President of the United States has been making all kinds of statements in an effort to calm fears for his own reasons. And some of those statements have not been helpful. would not want to see us in Barbados in an effort to calm fears, even though our motives are not as his might be, but our motives are genuine. I would not want us to see us make the mistake of saying things that run counter to what we purpose to achieve. I certainly have tried to signal, and I would want to express, and the PDP, the party that I lead, we want to make it clear that we support the government's efforts to contain, to prevent this thing from coming here, to contain it if it comes, and to provide as our capacity would allow. The only people confused are you. You all are confused.
Just proceed, member. Just proceed. You're not supposed to hear asides.
Let me,
All right,
when
member.
confused voices shout together, I can't help but hear.
Yes,
Mr.
proceed.
Speaker, let me repeat what I
Yes, proceed.
Let me repeat what I said.
Right, fair.
I think the honorable member for Christchurch East Central made a genuine effort to allay fears and to calm Bajans and to point their behavior in the right direction. I think, unfortunately, he made a few references and used a few illustrations that were inadequate to that objective. That's all I said. I said further, I support the government's efforts. I'm in solidarity with the government on this.
Fine.
The party that I lead is in solidarity with the government on this, in helping to prevent this thing from coming here. We haven't made any wild assertions. We haven't suggested any wild or imbecilic type of measures. We trust the government to get this right. We respect and trust our medical and public health professionals to get this right. We take it at face value that they are telling us the truth. If we are ever persuaded that they are not, you will hear me on a different score, in a different tone, on a different note. But we support the government's efforts to keep this thing out of Barbados. And if it does come here, the protocols in place to respond to that situation. We have limited capacity. So there's a limited extent to which we can go to deal with this. This threatens not Barbados Labour Party family alone. This threatens Barbados as a whole. This threatens life as we know it. We don't play politics with certain things at all. And this is one that we will not play politics with. And I want to make that clear. So when I critique the honorable members' voicings in respect to the few things I mentioned out of Africa and the United States or what have you, I am not trying to put down the government's effort to deal with this. I'm simply saying, let us be careful as to how we seek to calm our citizenry and to make things right. Now, the honorable member, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I really apologize for the delay, but the multiple interruptions has brought us to this point because I'm about 1/3 of the way I propose to go.
Please, all right, members, let the member proceed. He has unlimited time, so. Proceed, member. You're supposed to address the chair.
I'm addressing the chair.
Go ahead.
I'm addressing the chair. I always do address the chair. Mr. Deputy Speaker, now the honorable member for Christchurch East Central sought to set his presentation in a certain context. And substantially so, the context he created or set that in revolved around the whole COVID-19 threat. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, there are other dynamics. We do not, for one moment, seek to diminish or to devalue the importance of the COVID-19 threat. It's the biggest threat facing us right now. The biggest threat facing us right now is the COVID-19 threat. Perhaps except for one or two of the honorable ministers over there. The biggest threat facing us right now is the COVID-19. But there are some other dynamics operating in this context, this environment. These estimates are supposed to show us how the numbers are attempting to address those dynamics. We have a major problem with youth violence or youth deviance in Barbados. Now, I see in the estimates an effort here, and I know I have the ears of the Honourable Minister of Education at this point, if at no other time. We have in these estimates here a little bit of evidence here and a little bit of evidence there that the problem of youth deviance and youth violence has been noticed by the government. But I do not know where in these estimates is reflected a substantial and strategic effort this year to address this matter of youth deviance or youth violence in Barbados. It seems that not a day goes by that we hear of really violent manifestations of this type of deviant behavior. And you wonder what has become of our Barbados. And you wonder what has become of our young people. Mothers must hold their bellies and bawl. And communities reek with grief. Schools are under stress. Teachers, in some instances, look for cover. So we have a systemic problem of youth deviance and youth violence in Barbados. And to me, it's akin to my point on law and order. To me, estimates should show to me strategically here is where we plan to address this. Substantially here is what we hope to achieve this year. 1, 2, 3. We hope to achieve this year, and if we can, then that will help us to reduce that level of youth deviance in Barbados. I'll give you these, Mr. Speaker, in no set order here. I just put the notes on the paper, just listed them. They're real. Some of them potentially monumental in terms of the challenge they pose to our well-being, the viability of our economy, the cohesiveness and stability of our societies and our society and our communities. The spiraling cost burden. No joke, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I see that every day. People bring that to you every day. Every day. Every single day. People bring that to you. Mr. Speaker, and I use this just to illustrate. People usually approach you as a pastor of the church. There's always somebody who comes who wants help, pay a medical bill, get glasses, buy this for the children. Politicians get it. But I don't want to reflect upon the seeming dependency culture that obtains now around Barbados in politics and constituency relationships. So I use the illustration of church. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, and this is not unusual, yesterday, doesn't always every Sunday rise to this level. Yesterday, within 20 minutes of the close of church, I had people approaching me for help running up to nearly $4,000. Now you have to help. You see, I can't at church preach to people and then don't try to help them. You can't simply say to people, go and be blessed. The person is hungry, or the child is hungry, or the person is naked, or the water is off, or the lights are out. So this is the kind of culture we have at this church, at our church, that people look to the church for help. We don't spend our small offerings in buildings, and structure, and aesthetics. We spend it on ministry, and the number one reference point in ministry is people. So people know this because of culture. And they come in increasing numbers, and the volume is often significant. And I only make reference to yesterday because it's fresh in my mind. But and this reflects what happens out there. So people give less because they have less to give to the church. But then they expect more from the church because their need is great. We have a situation in Barbados. It is all right for those who are cushioned, well cushioned financially. It is all right for those who are removed at some distance from this situation. Politicians know it too. We aren't removed from it. And we know that people are under stress. We have to try to change that. Now, the birth context does not allow you at this time, I'm sure, to minister the kind of help, the kind of relief, perhaps, that we need to see so that these people's burdens might be lightened. And maybe they understand that, I don't know. But what they are bemused about and puzzled over is when government find it possible to get the resources to pay a high level of professional services and consultancy fees. Now, this is not something that we would like to hear, but it is a reality that we criticize the other administration for. And if the situation persists, obtains, and in fact, if the situation has become worse, then I find I have a duty to highlight that. And say that though I understand that birth constrains the government, and that in the context of rising costs, government must still extract from the pockets of the people so that the burden is made even heavier, I have a right and a duty to point out to the public of Barbados Parliament that you're spending excess money on professional services and consultancy fees. Something you criticized when you were in opposition, and yet you do more. I said that. Something we criticized. Well, because I said it when I was over there. I have to criticize it now. I am over here. Oh, I will shout as hard as I want. Is there, Mr. Speaker, some ceiling as to how loud I may shout?
You're not supposed to listen to our sides.
Is there some ceiling, Mr. Speaker, as to how loud I may shout?
Yes, speak. Go ahead.
So I have to shout loudly for those who do not hear or choose not to hear when I speak in moderate tones. But what you need to hear, which is even louder than my shout, what you need to hear, which is even louder than my shout, is the lament, the groanings coming from the people across Barbados, in St. Thomas, in St. Andrew, in St. Michael West, in St. John, in St. Michael Northwest. I didn't fear with anybody else. You need to hear those groanings, and you need to hear those shouts. Hello. The question at the end of the day is, How do these estimates suggest to this House? How do these estimates suggest to this House that the government is creating the environment in which that burden will be lightened and the shout, the lament coming from the groans of the public would be diminished? It is not my shouting that you must worry about. It is the shoutings of the public of Barbados. They're shouting help. They're shouting help. They're shouting, Lord, have mercy. They're shouting help. Hey, here is what they're shouting, gone from bad to worse. This is what they're shouting. I am not saying that. This is what, I am not saying that. This is what they are shouting. Gone from bad to worse. That is the shout. And that is the shout that you need to hear. That is the shout with which you should be concerned. There's a fear of crime in Barbados, a rising fear of crime. Members in here feel it too. Members in here sense it too, despite what they say. You can bring all the statistics in the world to show that the incidence of crime reflect less than they did this time last year. But the nature of crime, the proximity of violence to oneself is what creates a climate of fear. And there's a climate of fear in Barbados. There's a climate of fear in Barbados. People do not perform to their best in a climate of fear. Where in these estimates, if you only put in $9 million more in public order and public safety, where in here do you show that you are fully seized of that growing climate of fear? There's low morale. There's low morale in the protective services in Barbados. You can laugh. You can try your best at ridicule. But I deal with reality. No matter where I stand or sit, I deal with reality. There is low morale in the police force in Barbados. That is not something being said for the first time during this administration. That is something that was said during the course of the last administration by those who were in opposition at the time. And if I said it then, and the reality persists now, I will say it now too. You don't change your mouth based on where you are. You change your mouth if the reality changes. The reality has not changed, but rather grown worse. There is more of a sense of fear of crime in Barbados today than there was a couple of years ago. And that is true. And that is true. We have never known guns to be so prevalent on the streets of Barbados. We have never known a Barbadian youngster that disposed so readily and with enthusiasm to use guns of violence to cut down their peers. We have never known that to this extent. That is a reality. And at that time, we have low morale obtaining in the Barbados police force. For whatever reason, there is low morale. Scoff at that, don't treat to it, and you will find yourself at the wrong end of reality one of these days yourself. Mr. Speaker, Deputy Speaker, there's low morale among the prison officers in Barbados. You see the convergence of these negatives, Mr. Deputy Speaker? There's low morale with the police. There's no low morale in the officers of the prison service. We see the stories. We hear the stories. We are aware of the reality. It's the convergence of these dynamics that creates the bother. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are now perhaps beginning to hear the rumblings of low morale in the Barbados Defense Force. Mr. Speaker, these are the protective services. Mr. Speaker, these are the disciplinary services. Mr. Speaker, where law and order is challenged and under threat, where a government is unable to fully provide the financial and other resources to address law and order, where that is the reality, and then you have indiscipline and low morale among all of your protective services, Mr. Deputy Speaker, you are on a slippery slope. Yeah. Make fun of that. Make fun of that. Make fun of that low morale in the opposition. Make fun of that. Make fun of that. Let them, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But Bajans are not stupid. Bajans are not stupid. And you can sing the story and the chorus of joy and gladness when it suits you, and not be prepared to cast your burdens on the Lord when the time comes. And I say to you, this convergence of those dynamics, Mr. Speaker, is a bad thing for Barbados. And if the government does not find it possible to wrestle it to the ground, it portends a sinister evil for us. I want to address this next point because I raised this also with one or two members, one or two honorable ministers who led the teams to this, the well of this house. There is persistent pressure brought on the working class of Barbados. Capital pressure. The pressure of the capital class upon the working class, the underclass, the underemployed class in Barbados is brought on by capital. A government's moral mandate is to deal with things like this. A government's moral mandate is to deal with things like this. In any kind of austerity program, especially IMF related, capital always seems to find further leeway for exerting pressure on the working class. Even without that austerity program, that is reality and has been our history in Barbados. And usually it is foreign capital, though not solely and only foreign capital. Domestic private capital does it too. And so you hear the stories of many. They can't do this, they can't do that, they don't get this, they don't get that. And organized labor makes its laudable efforts to defend the interests of the working class. But there is an aspect of government's responsibility which prescribes for morally undertaking a duty to help address that as well. That is a reality in Barbados. So how do we create an environment, even as government, it is not organized labor's a responsibility alone. How do we create, even as a government, the kind of space in which the interests of labor are protected while not denying the interests of the capital class? How do we prevent exploitation to the advantage of the capital class? That is where we are, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Government is about that. Estimates is about that. You know, Mr. Deputy Speaker, this problem has come again to the fore recently. This matter of access to our beach lands and beach spaces. This matter of money interests being able to achieve the kind of control in the absence of legal ownership over beach accesses and beach lands in Barbados. That is part of the context in which these estimates come. It's not only about COVID, it's about all of these other things as well. It is about all of these other things as well. And you can't get away from that. You can't have a dubious and questionable situation where land is sold to a private developer. Private developer buys the land, and then you want to tell the private developer you can't do this and you can't do that. That should have been set up front, or the land not sold to him in the first place. Bajans are made to be spectators. Bajans are made to be onlookers. White people with money have their way paved for them. This government must ensure that it sends to the public of Barbados a clear signal that this will not happen, not both here. Not both here. Not both here. Not both here. Part of the context of this budget, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is zero growth situation. In no growth situation. One honorable member stood up in this chamber not too long ago, and I wouldn't even deal with that in detail, and sought to give a tutorial on what growth and productivity is all about. And in my view, and humbly I suggest, presented something not even worthy of this House. A 7-point strategy which showed neither strategy nor strong points. That's another story that we will deal with on another day. The sad thing is that honorable member was patted on the back and patted on the shoulder and applauded by colleagues as having made a sterling contribution, which will go down in the history of the records of this Parliament. Yes, it will. Yes, it will. But not in terms of commendation. Other terms, perhaps, which I would not characterize right now. But zero growth, that is the context of these estimates, Mr. Deputy Speaker. You understand that? COVID is a reality. That is the context for these estimates. But the context of zero growth is also a reality. Also a reality. And the numbers must jump to say, this is how we will spur growth. The numbers must say that loudly, not speak it feebly. The numbers must speak it loudly. We are operating further, Mr. Speaker. This is part of the context of these estimates. Middle class erosion. Middle class erosion. Is the middle class of Barbados better off today than it was 2 years ago? Well, we know for sure the working class isn't. Is the middle class in Barbados better off today than it was 2 years ago? I think the answer is no. I think these estimates should be suggestive of a view as to how we will try to stop that erosion, how we would try to stop the reversal of gains, many of which were inspired by the policies of this party in an earlier administration. And we got to see that as part of the context. I really do dread to make the next point, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I have it in my notes and I have to. part of the context is very, very, very limited, and I put it very euphemistically and mildly, very limited access to housing in Barbados, especially for working class people. That is part of the context. It's not just COVID. It is this persistent challenge that poor people find of getting someplace to live. We've seen the rise of the slumlord in Barbados. We've seen the rise of slum dwellings in Barbados. We're seeing the emergence of slum communities in Barbados. Not good, not good, not what we as a country aspire to, not good, not what we hope for, not what we look forward to when we were young, Mr. Speaker, and coming along, and it is not what we want others to aspire to. I have my own view. Government's limited capacity prevents it from providing finances for housing or providing housing for majority of Barbadians who are seeking housing. Then find a vehicle to transfer some of the state-owned lands to these people and help them with the process of that historical Barbadian enterprise instinct of self-development, of self-building. All of us have relatives who historically have given themselves to this, built their own places with a little help, little by little constructed their own dwellings. We can't continue to live in our mansions of comfort and the few who live in mansions of luxury, while majority of our black working class people don't have a roof over their heads or access to some form of housing. We have, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and is very much an integral part of the context, an unenterprising domestic private sector, and $9 billion of untapped liquidity in the banking sector. You can imagine that? You can imagine that, Mr. Speaker? Government is broke. People are broke. Banks got $9 billion untapped liquidity. The unenterprising, unexcited private sector that we have known historically does not feel one impulse, one instinct towards accessing that capital for further investment to help the country out of a hole. That is the reality. That is the reality. It's not only COVID that's the reality, that is the reality too. $9 billion liquidity in the banking sector. The banks are sitting on it. The banks are sitting on it. The banks are benefiting from it. The economy is not. The economy is not. Small business people are not. Small enterprise is not. Barbados is not. The banks are benefiting. That's part of the context that was not addressed today, or addressed properly in the discussions preceding today in the well of this House. Part of the context, Mr. Speaker, is the stress and distress caused by water outages persisting in St. Andrew, St. Joseph, parts of St. Peter, and St. Thomas, St. John. And that continues. This administration found it. 2 years later, it persists. Every day, there are notices of water outages, water shortages, turn-offs, this place and the next. That is part of the reality, the context, the lack of supply, whatever the challenges faced by the Barbados Water Authority, some attributed to drought, some attributed to bad administration, it is said in the past, some attributed to aging infrastructure. Whatever the cause, that is part of the context in which these estimates come. Business closures in Bridgetown, Mr. Speaker. Business closures, there's some places in Bridgetown, some malls, if you may call them that. You go in, and more spaces are unoccupied than those which are occupied. They've closed down. People are closing down. We like to tell ourselves to derive some measure of comfort that they're moving out of Bridgetown and the other place. They're moving out, they're moving. They're shutting down. They're closing. You go to Bridgetown some days, these days, Mr. Speaker, and you are surprised. This is Bridgetown at this hour. Where are the people? Where are the people? Business closures. Business closures. It's part of the context. What are we doing to stem this decline? What are we doing to keep Bridgetown alive? It's all right to talk about Bridgetown Transformation Project and go and knock down a couple of buildings. It's all right. But there's more we got to do to revitalize Bridgetown, to make Bridgetown come alive, to bring people into Bridgetown, and to cause businesses in Bridgetown to be viable. That is part of the context in which these estimates come. My honorable friend from St. Michael North interfered with me earlier. And though I have always sought not to interfere with him too much, he persists from time to time with these interjections to try to excite my wrath. And so with a few words I would want to speak to the international business sector, because that's part of the context of these estimates. I didn't hear the voice of my honorable friend from St. Michael North at all in these estimates. And I know his ministry didn't come to the well of the House. Apart from that, I didn't hear his voice. But we've seen the decline in revenues from the international business sector now for some time. We've seen the loss of international business for various reasons. We have seen the loss of international business revenues in Barbados. Have we not? Have we not? We have seen the departure from Barbados of a number of companies due to changes overseas, principally in Canada, due to changes in the region. We've seen that. And all I am saying, and I am not being critical of my honorable friend, I never am, I never hope to be. I'm not going to be critical of him. I would be critical of what his ministry brings to the table. And these estimates should be telling us in clear terms, here is what the government plans to do in an effort to revive this sector, to generate more revenue, because that's one of the problems in Barbados. That's one of the issues that landed us in the problems in the first place. Decline in this sector, next to tourism, the decline in this sector. And these estimates should say to us, this is what we intend to do to address this matter.
I didn't want to, on a point of order, the
Point
honourable
of-
is misleading
point of
the
order.
chamber by categorically stating that there's been a decrease in revenue to the international business sector. The way that the tax revenues are stated in these estimates, and indeed generally, there is no breakout of how much tax revenue is generated by the international business sector as opposed to the other areas that generate taxation. So I don't know how my learning friend, how the honourable member can really make that bold assertion that there has been a decline in revenues from the sector.
Okay, well said.
I thought my honorable friend would have said that the honorable member, say Michael West, is totally wrong. That there's been no loss. He can't say that. I thought my honorable friend would have said that there's no loss in revenues from this sector. Well, my honorable friend said, there's no breakout. I challenge the honorable member to say that there's no loss. I challenge my honorable friend to say that there is no loss in revenue experienced by the international sector. I challenge my honorable friend to say that. If the best he can do is to say, as minister, I don't know, I challenge him to say that too. The context, the context,
Let's proceed, please.
context of these estimates, Mr. Speaker, and this is very, very, very serious, is one in which we're facing severe challenges, serious challenges to the health sector. Before COVID, we were facing serious challenges and stresses to the health sector in Barbados. This is before COVID. The system is under stress, and they acknowledge that the government is trying to address some of that stress. The system does not have the capacity to deliver to the level that we would want to realize as a people, and that is true. This is the context in which the estimates comes. And at a time, Mr. Speaker, when there's this growing incidence of chronic non-communicable diseases. Now, it is a matter that we raised during the debate in the well as well, where we're discussing the heads. The convergence of a seeming perfect storm on several fronts. Aging population, the incapacity of the sector to deliver, the financial constraints of government, shortage of nurses, shortage of equipment. Now the government is making efforts to address some of these things, and we applaud that. It's not a criticism. The point being made is that the estimates that we are debating now come before us in a context where there's serious challenges already existing with reference to the health sector. And now on top of that is the COVID-19, of which the honorable member spoke. That portends serious stresses for us if we are seriously impacted. And it is not a matter to be taken lightly. And I know the honorable member for Christchurch East Central addressed the matter of COVID broadly and addressed the efforts of government in the context of that response to deal with that issue. But the estimates itself provides, to me, a forum for wider discussion. I have said, and I really do strongly believe it, that we have come to the point in Barbados where perhaps we need a special dispensation with respect to the health sector in Barbados and the provision of health services. There are some who would feel that the business of education demands first call. And there are some who would feel that the situation is now that the business of law and order demands first call. There are some who might suggest that the health services sector demands first call. That's a debate that can be had. But one cannot help but underscore that the challenges facing us in relation to health as a country are immensely serious. And when COVID is put on that, then we're really facing a serious situation. We've seen the slow emergence of investment capital. I spoke briefly to this, I'll go past this. Slow emergence of investment capital. Hyatt has been coming for a long time. Ain't get there yet. And that's a big project. Sam Lawrence Castle been coming for a long time. Ain't get there yet. A big project. We're hearing about some small and medium-sized projects to come along, but let me get there yet either. The process is slow. Process is slow. The estimates must be understood. Whatever the numbers say, from that perspective, that in terms of the capital and infrastructural investment that we need from private development, the process is slow. And we got to find a way to treat to that. Tourism numbers increase. My understanding is without commensurate spend. Numbers increase, but without commensurate spend. I know that we have restructured the tourism sector in recent times, the tourism ministry. And I look there and I see $7 million, I think it was. They understand that this may be as a result of how the ministry is now structured. But irrespective of that, I am of the view that this tourism industry, as significant as it is to us, needs to be better funded. Now, if you tell me you don't think my honorable friend from St. James Central can manage any more money than this, that is one thing. I would not believe you. But the fact is, for the lead foreign exchange earner, the one leg on which the economy stands, to be only credited with $7 million, is it? Doesn't strike me as though everybody's got things in perspective. And I believe that there's a special discussion needed on tourism in Barbados, because we've got to find some new directions in which to trek. We've got to find some new types of projects on which we can rely, while at the same time recognizing that we cannot exercise this over-reliance on this limited sector. The benefits derived are skewed. So a lot of receipts are not coming into the Barbados economy. Money is invested, dollars returned, but returned on the outside of the economy. Menial jobs had by Barbadians to a large extent. Big spots, too often not given to locals. So the nature of the revenue derived, the nature of the benefits is skewed. Those derived from the tourism arrivals. And there's a stress situation with taxi operators that will explode if we're not careful, especially in the light of this COVID thing. You got nearly 300 taxi operators wrestling with each other figuratively every day outside of the port for the meager offerings coming to them from the tourism cruise sector. Wow. And that sector now has gone dormant. Those livelihoods are threatened. Those families are jeopardized, their well-being is. And there must be found an alternative to address that. We can't simply say government will get into some capital spending and those who are made to lose because of the downturn in the tourism sector will be shifted. You don't just shift people so. A lot of those construction jobs call for skills and training. And all I'm saying is we need to find multiple alternatives that can treat to those taxi operators and people like that. People's Party has 1 or 2 ideas if you want. Check me. Because we take those matters seriously. These are Barbadian people who want to live and work and earn in Barbados, just like anybody else. My honorable friend to my left, immediate left, has done a good job as a new minister in short time on the South Coast. And the temporary solution to our South Coast woes is appreciated, because I remember the Barbados before the temporary solution. That is why I raised the concern during the earlier debates when that ministry was in the well as to the impact of the temporary solution that provides for outfall or outflow into our marine environment. And I was happy to hear that reports today, which are taken frequently from tests, given frequently from tests taken, suggest that there's no harm, no compromise of the marine environment, no threat to the world of the waters around Barbados on the South Coast. My fear is how long that situation will persist. My fear is that one of these days we will do a test which will show that there's damage to the South Coast marine environment with implications for the rest of the Barbados tourist coast, south and west. That's my fear. And these things, to me, are a critical part of the context of these estimates, not just the COVID threat. I have spoken repeatedly about land prices in Barbados, the things that drive land prices, and the fact that the average Bajan now can't afford a spot of land, not on a single income, so that rules out a whole set of people, sometimes not on a dual or double income, that rules out some as well. But it needs to be appreciated, in my view, again, that part of the mandate given to any government, especially one with large numbers like this, is a moral duty to make sure, that the patrimony of Barbados does not go beyond the reach of Barbadians. And there needs to be some adjustments in land policy. And that's a very critical part. I made 1 or 2 suggestions in here already that have been scoffed at. And that is part and parcel of the context in which these estimates come today, not just COVID. The government depends still on a high level of taxation to keep its affairs running in Barbados. Too high a level of taxation has a counterproductive effect because it constrains the economy by contracting spending. And then there is a subsequent spillover into into other aspects of the economy. So this business of taxation, whether it be consumer taxes or property taxes or user fees, has to be managed very carefully, because over-taxation can be counterproductive and result in a negatively trending growth line. And the estimates before us should be understood in that context. There is, Mr. Speaker, a signal being sent. Capital spending will save the day for us going forward, before and after, before and now with COVID. Capital spending will save the day. Well, government does have a lot of space for capital spending, and it is hoped that it will find a little bit more breathing space when it approaches the IMF in the current circumstances. But, Mr. Speaker, it makes no sense to me. It does not make sufficient sense to me, may I say, if we get money to expand government's ability to have capital spending. We get projects going, sponsored by the state. And then, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the privilege of work, the privilege of contracts, the privilege of employment is restricted to a few, either of a certain hue or with certain connections. Now, that is the reality in Barbados. Small contractors complain, we don't get the work. It goes to the big boys. It goes to this body. It goes to that body. We can name for you the 3 musketeers of construction privilege in Barbados, but that's not my business so to do. You are as well aware of the reality as I am. And I'm saying these estimates should take cognizance of all of these things. You can't simply come and talk about COVID, though COVID is important. Stress that, stress that, stress that, stress that even further. But at the same time, these estimates should deal with some of these critical things. I must be able, as I said earlier, to look into these estimates and identify clearly some strategic policy positions being implied by the numbers that will change the profile and the culture of our economy. And a part of the culture of our economy that needs to be changed is that which grants privilege to a few who are known, while not opening the doors to smaller players who are less blessed. We have to take a note of these things. In another forum, not too long ago, I was raising the concern that in this context where we are threatened with this COVID presence and stuff like that, you may have a situation where prices are inflated, where prices are increased, where hoarding by wholesalers and retailers take place to create a scarcity and a demand that drives up prices. And therefore, we need not to see that ugly feature obtaining in Barbados if the worst comes to the worst because of this virus. And I was told in very clear terms, Bishop need not worry about that. The private sector in Barbados is not about that. We will not encourage that. We will not do that. Well, we wait to see. Already I'm hearing stories of prices being increased. And I remember that this administration removed something called the NSRL because it was felt that it was contributing significantly to the level of high costs in Barbados for consumers. And what has happened in its wake? Have prices come down, Mr. Deputy Speaker? I don't think so, not where I shop, and not where your people shop for you. And you cannot tell me that I must have confidence that in a situation with potential scarcity and shortages, when private sector practices have been given in the past to benefiting to the max, or as far as possible, from pricing, that when a situation comes in which there's scarcity and shortages, I'm supposed to have confidence that that will not happen. What I heard the government say, and I heard it repeated here today by the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central, the government is prepared, if that happens, to introduce pricing constraints in Barbados. And if it happens, I look forward to seeing that reaction. I trust the voice of the government more than I do that of the private sector. Therefore, if this price manipulation because of an unfortunate circumstance develops, I expect and anticipate the government will in fact introduce those price controls to keep a lid on things. There's an absence of vehicles for Bajans to come into ownership in Barbados. There's a big thing for me. There's a big thing for the People's Party. this business of ownership, those relationships revolving around ownership in Barbados must change. Must change. The ownership range is too restricted in Barbados. Whether you're talking about property or you're talking about businesses, that ownership range is too constricted, too limited. More people must be facilitated into ownership. I believe that the Urban Tenantries Program, for instance, introduced by that administration, was an attempt to address this type of thing. That small people can get ownership of the properties on which they had lived there and their families for quite. That's a good thing, a great thing. I don't know what's become of the program. That's a good thing. But quite beyond that, we have to change substantially the ownership patterns and profile in Barbados. And the government, with a mandate like this, must feel that it is part of its moral responsibility, again, to address the business of ownership. We do nothing if we do not bring Barbadians into ownership in Barbados, whether we talk about property or we talk about land. Let me say this, Mr. Speaker. Let me say this. I really had planned to speak for an hour, but they asked for 3 hours, so they got. And they could ask for another hour if they're there, and I will give it to them. But let me say this one. We are happy for Guyana as to what is happening there with respect to their energy sector. We are potentially an economic boom for them. Potentially an economic boom for them. But you know what that says to me, Mr. Deputy Speaker? Here potentially is another center of serious competition for investment for Barbados. And by that I mean there are people who are already looking to Guyana to invest their dollars. Private interest development is being diverted to Guyana, whether it is airlines flying down there, hotels setting up there. Private interest is looking at Guyana as a new context of opportunity for them. That means that is serious competition, in my view, for Barbados. Because those who may have been thinking of coming here and for whom the process has been for some reason delayed, may in fact now target their interests in Guyana. So you verily might see a movement of potential investment away from Barbados into Guyana. In fact, Barbados itself is already promoting investment in Guyana. And you verily may see that foreign investment, which perhaps previously looked at Barbados as the most appealing environment, economically speaking, in the Caribbean, now look to Guyana. And if that's the case, that is serious competition that we must face down. I will bring this to a conclusion, having bored the rest of the House for all this time, but hopefully having communicated some concerns which the government will take on board and which will reflect the concerns and interests of the people outside of this chamber and around this country. I could have, what's the word, alphabeticize, that's the word, those points. But I just gave you 26 areas. I put them in alphabetical order for you if you want. I just gave you 26 areas of dynamics that constitute the context for these estimates. And I humbly do that. I gave you my reflections on the numbers, some of the numbers. I gave you my concerns as to some of the things the honorable member with good intention said with reference to COVID. But beyond those things, I listed for you 26 dynamics, serious dynamics, which are critically a part of the context in which we now live and the context in which we discuss these estimates. And having said that, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am done.
Member for St. James Central.
Deputy Speaker, sir, I take the opportunity to thank the honorable member for his contribution to the House. I want to begin, sir, by apologizing to the honorable member because I missed.
Speaking of mic, I think your mic went off.
I want to thank the honorable member for his contribution to the House, sir. And I want to begin by offering heartfelt apologies to the honorable member. I had to attend a meeting of the executive of the Barbados Hotel Tourism Association meeting on the very pressing issue which is confronting not only this sector but by extension the country. And so therefore I would have missed the better part of his 3-hour presentation. And that may be a good thing, sir, because it allows me to steer a wide berth of any comment thereon. I want to begin, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, by pointing out that perhaps the most important part of these estimates, as so far as it touches and concerns the Ministry of Tourism, sir, is the fact to which the honourable member alluded when he spoke about the estimated expenditure of the Ministry of Tourism and International Transport being now $7,338,095. Yes, sir, you heard me correctly. For the first time in the history of this country, since its coming to a stage of independence, the lead economic sector in Barbados, that which up to last financial year consumed a mammoth $103,905,763, is now going to be costing the taxpayers of this country $7,338,095. Were I to quote she who leads this country and does so competently, when she said it was possible to take the burden of carrying the tourism sector off of the backs of the people and to do so without hurting the sector. And the naysayers, which of course at that time did not include the honorable member who just took his seat because he was among those who were the proponents. The naysayers said it could not be done. The reply would have been, give me the vote and watch me. Mr. Speaker, sir, it has been done. And the lead sector in Barbados, the most mature sector in this country, has effectively been repositioned and placed in a position where those people who have carried it in terms of commercial practice, commercial expertise, being hands-on in the marketplace, dealing hands-on with the broad base of several thousand members of staff across the sector, Mr. Speaker, sir. Those people who have made Barbados' tourism by reputation the finest product to be found, not only in the Eastern Caribbean, but in the Caribbean as a whole, are now in a position, Mr. Speaker, sir, to carry that sector only with the Barbados government functioning as the policy intervener and the destination management company policy provider. But outside of that, Mr. Speaker, sir, the sector has now been repositioned to carry itself. Grantley Adams International Airport, Mr. Speaker, sir, part of that sector, is now at a stage where we have gone globally for requests internationally for proposals to operate the Grantley Adams International Airport in a way that will see for the first time the airport now looking at projections of $40 million and more in profit when the year comes, sir, as opposed to $10 million odd. Mr. Speaker, sir, Harrison's Cave, another situation in which every single year the cave scrambled to get a meager break-even. Now, in advanced stage of negotiations with private sector for, again, an opportunity for it to be dealt with by the private sector, operated by the private sector, like the airport, Mr. Speaker, sir, without even a suggestion of it being taken from the people of Barbados, but operated under license, under the supervision and the watchful eye of the government of the people of Barbados, sir, but with a profit-oriented motive. And that, sir, is the change in color and complexion of the way in which the discussion has taken place. It is, sir, the change in the philosophical approach. We were all, well, not all, most of us on this side who were here before 2018
Yeah.
would have heard the former Minister of Finance stand, Mr. Speaker, sir, in the Parliament of Barbados and ask, well, what it is that you're supposed to cut. Tell me what it is that you want me to cut. You would have heard that,
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, sir. And the fact of the matter is, sir, that you had to, who is you had to send home? Nobody has been sent home, sir. Nothing has been cut other than that we have taken the burden off the people of Barbados by roughly $100 million. And what has been the outcome of it? I heard the almost grudgeful commentary of he who just took his seat, the leader of the opposition, the head of the power, what is the organization he calls it? The Power Party? Power Searchers Party? Joe's PP. And January, sir, to December last year, sir, because it is important to understand before we go further from whence we came. Between January and December last year, sir, Barbados, and you know I always say that when you're looking at the statistics of tourism, I have an interest in the spend side. There are those who preceded me that kept a lot of noise about the arrival side. But happily for us, between last year, January and December, sir, we had an increase in arrivals of 5.4% over the preceding year. It was led by the United Kingdom, sir, which saw its best ever performance in terms of arrivals to this country of 10.4% increase. The next highest tier was again a record level of arrivals out of the United States of 8.2% increase. So that in terms of arrivals, both the UK and the US market broke records last year. No, you've not heard this minister go up on top of the roof and trumpet that. Because quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, sir, I believe that if I can stand here and say it is the best product in the Caribbean, then we should be breaking records. I have no difficulty with that. What matters more to me, Mr. Speaker, sir, is the fact that over the period January to June 2019, and I'm going to stop there to explain something to this country, as I have already explained to the sector I have been given the honor to lead. Barbados, sir, has trifled and toyed with golden opportunity, and the time must now come to an end where we do this. We, sir, have for too long, for successive administrations, so I'm not going to be political, for successive administrations, we have failed to put ourselves in a position where we can adequately and accurately calculate on our own tourism spend in Barbados. It is a necessity, sir, whose day has come. What we have done is to rely on the assistance of the Caribbean Tourism Organization, which has year after year done its best to give us that which is an assessment of the aggregate data. And I don't wish to call it, sir, a guesstimation, because it is more scientific than that. But, sir, it is not conclusive. And according to them, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, spend would have increased between January to June, because the figures June to December are not yet in, by 7.6% over the period of January to June 2018. So we would have seen a 7.6% increase in spend. But it is necessary, sir, for us as a country to have tourism satellite data, tourism satellite accounting, where we can accurately and scientifically measure the inputs by the sector so that we know exactly what it is has been contributed by visitors to our GDP And for those who are intellectually curious, and this is where I would have wanted to hear a leader of the opposition speaking to the country, for those who are sufficiently curious, sir, we would have wanted to know, we need to know, not I would have wanted, we need to know, and I may be the first Minister of Tourism to say this in the Parliament of Barbados, but I make no apology. We need to know the extent to which the support that we provide to the visitor economy is a draw from the public purse, because the visitors consume water, the visitors consume electricity, the visitors consume, sir, other goods and services that have to be provided for in this country. And it must be measured. And Mr. Speaker, sir, this is where this sector has been failed for decades, because that is not the level of discourse that has been encouraged in this country. So we get and say, oh, the numbers are high. And I made the point to the BHTA at the last annual general meeting that they had last year, that it is possible for a man to have a farm, and on that farm he got plenty cows, but he has less milk. And I have not come, sir, to count cow, but I came to drink milk. And the reality is, Mr. Speaker, sir, that is the approach that we have to bring. So I want to differ with my friend, the leader of the opposition, only insofar as that he is correct when he says that the numbers went up, but he is dead wrong when he says that the spend did not move commensurately. In fact, sir, the fact of the matter is that if we go by the data we have available, between January to June 2019, stayover spend in Barbados increased by 7.6% over 2018. The total expenditure was $694.7 million for that 6-month period, up from $645 million in 2018 for the same 6-month period. But, Mr. Speaker, sir, we have to go further than that. And as I say, we have to be able to position this country to be in a better and more detailed and scientific way, able to deliver on tourism satellite accounting, which has been the bane of the sector's existence in terms of developing as we need to develop, and to do this job sensibly. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, enough of that. There are obviously challenges which face the sector, which threaten to throw into a tailspin all of the gains to which I have just alluded. And it would be remiss of me, Mr. Speaker, sir, not to spend a significant period of the time that I'm talking to this chamber on that matter. I know that the leader of the opposition says he wants to hear more than COVID. And I too, sir, would like to be able to talk about more than COVID. But regrettably, with global travel being brought to a standstill, with announcements being made as recently as this evening that France is closing its borders to the world, with announcements being made as recently as this morning that Canada is closing her borders to the world, with announcements being made as recently as yesterday that the European Union in large measures closed its borders to the world, Mr. Speaker, sir, and we could go on and on. Right next door in Trinidad and Tobago, a CARICOM state has said that no nationals other than Trinidadian nationals and Tobagonians are welcome. The border closed for 14 days. To all. Oh, Mr. Speaker, sir, the reality is, therefore, that we cannot come to this place and appear, I put it no higher, because I don't believe that the leader of the opposition has taken leave of his senses. But he must not appear or allow himself to appear to be making light of that which is obviously now the most devastating pandemic to have confronted planet Earth in this century, in terms of its impact not only on health, but in terms of its impact on commerce globally as concerned. Oh, Mr. Speaker, sir, the reality is that out there are those who would want us to take the same reaction. And the first thing I want to say to Barbadians, sir, is that we have to be measured about this suggestion that it is a light matter to close this country's borders. This government has as its first priority the public health of our citizens, the well-being of our communities. We are all Barbadians. We all got children, wives, families here, Mr. Speaker, sir. The reality is, however, that there is also a considerable knock-on effect for this country's commercial viability. And let us not forget, because we are now breathing a little bit easier, and now walking with a little bit more pep in our step and glide in our stride, that it was only just under 2 years ago that this country was crestfallen and wondering where the next meal was coming from in many, many, many households, where we had just about $400 million to call our foreign exchange reserves. Import cover to last us, Mr. Speaker, sir, for approximately a month. And Mr. Speaker, sir, let us not forget either that off the top of my head, I can tell you that if we are having, as we are likely to do, and this is where, again, I must differ with the tone taken by the leader of the opposition, because we have to confront these matters and speak to them not as though you're reading the book of Lamentation, but speak with a view to how we are going to cope with the realities and to manage and reposition Barbados so that we can deal with this situation and come out of it more competitive and more robust than we were before. Mr. Speaker, sir, the craft industry in this country is supported in large measure by our visitors as well. Let us not forget that when tourists, even now in their hotels, they ain't got to go outside. You could go to almost any hotel in Barbados and find that there are 1 or 2 vendors who are dealing in craft, making it on the spot. In several hotels on the West Coast, that is a reality. In several on the South Coast, it is a reality. They go on the beaches and they buy craft. That is a part. So there are businesses that are immediately affected there. The restaurants, Mr. Speaker, sir, the restaurants, largely supported not only by Barbadians, but largely, Mr. Speaker, sir, by the visiting community as well. Mr. Speaker, sir, the distributive sector that must provision all of the hotels in this country with the food and beverages that are being supplied in those restaurants or in the hotels themselves, Mr. Speaker, sir. And the goods don't get up off of the warehouse and walk across the street to your hotel, Mr. Deputy Speaker. They have to be driven there in trucks. And the trucks have drivers, Mr. Speaker, sir. The trucks must be maintained by people who are into mechanical and automobile repair work, Mr. Speaker, sir. There must be people who put tires on the trucks, sell them gasoline. All those are business endeavors and services, none of which would ordinarily define themselves as being part of the tourism industry or the tourism sector. So it is easy to say, well, don't let nobody come out here because there's a risk. We have to manage that risk. We have to manage it as best as we can. But we have to also balance the risk against the considerable knock-on effect and fallout that would take place economically across the length and breadth of Barbados. Because I just named approximately 10 types of businesses, sir, none of which are touristic in nature, but all of which would be negatively impacted by a sudden decision to close borders. And I ain't get, sir, to the fundamentals of the fact that every hotel got to be insured. So that's the insurance industry, the real estate people, Mr. Speaker, sir, the legal profession, the medical profession, and all the others, the beauticians, et cetera, the people who do their spa work, spa treatments, and that kind of thing. It goes on and on and on. And Mr. Speaker, sir, what we have done, therefore, is to try to bring a far more prudent and mature approach to this, I think, than, and with great respect, many other countries have. And we have, as a group of people here in Barbados, to appreciate the fact that Barbados was ahead of most of the world. Right now, the debate in the United States of America is how to get labs to do testing for COVID-19 and get the results to come back in a shorter period than 2 or 3 days. President Donald Trump said that he has to wait 2 or 3 days for his test results. Mr. Speaker, sir, in Barbados, you wait 4 hours. We don't, that story and the reaction in your face, Mr. Speaker, sir, tells me that you yourself are hearing this for the first time, and maybe we are guilty of hiding our light under a bushel. But the reality is, therefore, we are ahead in terms of our ability to do things, even ahead of the United States of America. Great Britain, Mr. Speaker, sir, I passed through Great Britain on my way back from a very successful meeting along with my friend from the member for St. Philip North, St. Philip West, when we went to Ghana. Cultural and touristic exercise, sir. And passing through Heathrow and Gatwick. Not a public health nurse, 3 weeks ago, not a public health nurse to be seen. No, but in Barbados, people were meeting visitors with thermometers and taking their temperature. We were ahead of Great Britain, Mr. Speaker, sir. That is the reality of how this country has been operating. And we have not been doing it without a purpose. We have been doing it because we understand the sensitivity that the social media practitioners seem to be accusing us of not getting. It is because we get it that we were out of the gates earlier than everybody else, sensitizing people, making sure that we had the capacity in place as best as a small island can in order to keep our borders open and keep businesses going because, Mr. Speaker, sir, above and beyond the shocking consequences of a public health viral outbreak like COVID is, there would also be the economic contagion that threatens to make it impossible for anybody to pay any bills for not 2 weeks or 4 weeks, Mr. Speaker, sir, but pay any bills for months and months and months. Let us understand that every one of the attractions and experiences in Barbados operates on an exceptionally slim profit margin, if one at all. All of them is seeing profit. And therefore, sir, if you take the money away from them, if you take the business away from them, almost certain financial disaster will follow. Now, that is really what is about to be inflicted on this country through no fault of our own. Because as we have seen air travel being cut back, and let me share with you a little bit of what the most recent data is. As recently as this morning, the company called IAG, which is the owner of British Airways and several other airlines as well, has indicated that they intend to ground 75% of their fleet. We do not yet know, because it is so fluid a situation, we do not yet know the extent to which that will impact British Airways, the company. But the company, overarching parent company, IAG, of which British Airways is a part, and others as well, will see 75% of the planes stay on the ground, going nowhere to nobody's country. And why? Because India has shut itself down. South Africa has shut itself down. And you go on and on and on. Well, Mr. Speaker, sir, Virgin Atlantic announced this morning that they're asking all of their staff to take 8 weeks without pay. And you think about it. We ask the body to do that here.
Jeez.
And if you think it through, Mr. Speaker, so how does a mother look at her little children and say, well, I have no money to go to the supermarket with for the next 2 months? That is what is happening in the United Kingdom as we speak. And Mr. Speaker, sir, American Airlines is looking at a 50% grounding of its fleet. Virgin wants £7 billion bailout. And American Airlines, 50% of the fleet to be grounded. The major carriers around the world, far less the small ones, are imperiled. There's obviously a consequence for Barbados, and I will come to that. Because I want this debate not to be only about the lamentation that we have heard from the leader of the opposition, without any suggestion. He said to come to him, come to his party if you want ideas. As I came out here, I ran to a gentleman by the name of Greenwich, somebody, Neville or something, Greenwich. And I thought that he was coming to hear Sylvan, yes. I thought he was coming to hear his leader speak, only to discover that he ain't got nothing to do with the party no more. He done with them and that. He going to the dance now. The leader of the opposition didn't share that with us, but that is true. And he could get up and say that I'm wrong if he wants to, but I know he's a man who believes in the truth. He wouldn't move. And Mr. Speaker, sir, it isn't only the airline industry. On Saturday morning, you would have learned.
Let's hear the member.
On Saturday morning, you would have learned the gravity of this as it impacted our cruise sector, where a group called CLEAR, give me a chance, William. A group
Order,
called
please.
CLEAR,
Order, please.
a group called CLEAR, Cruise Lines International Association, issued a stop order, involuntary stop order, for a period of 2 months for the global cruise industry. So that cruise lines, as of Monday, I believe it is, will no longer be offering any cruises anywhere in the world. Unprecedented. It has never happened before. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, let us understand that these things have implications for Barbados. There is no force field that we have put up that says it is impossible for us to become a victim of, there's no force field we put up that says it is impossible for us to become a victim of the economic fallout. Equally, there is no force field that we can put up to make sure that we will never, at any stage, be impacted by COVID-19. Because you can close your borders to foreigners, but you can't close your borders to locals. And there are a lot of Barbadians who are at present trying to get themselves back here from Great Britain, and back here from the United States, and back here from Canada, because they feel more comfortable to be home with part that they're born, Mr. Speaker, sir. But the reality is that we have to balance risk. And what we have done to the best of our ability is to make sure that we have our public health officials at the airport testing temperatures. And yes, I'll be the first to say, maybe not every single person who passed through the gates of Grantley Adams International Airport had a thermometer put to his forehead. But the public health officials are also making assessments of those who are coughing and sneezing and sweating profusely and showing outward manifestations. They are talking to people and finding out about their travel history. They are trying, Mr. Speaker, sir, to make sure that we can provide a filter that gives us at least a risk-based assessment of the people who we are letting into Barbados. It is not a free-for-all. There are people who have been culled out of the line and pulled out of the line and then subjected to closer scrutiny. And then, sir, put in self-quarantine. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, thus far, we have been able to make sure that this country is not negatively affected. But let us not be so quick in our criticism and so strident in our criticism to lose sight of the fact that there is a very delicate balance that we are trying to do. Because the other road to travel, sir, would be to forecast inevitable doom for every family, not just those who are employed in a hotel or in a restaurant, but across the island, sir. Because if you think it through, from the banking sector to the insurance sector to the real estate sector to the distributive sector to the automotive arts, to the automotive sector, Mr. Speaker, sir, almost everywhere in some way is connected to this behemoth that they call tourism in Barbados, that really already consumes 45% of this country's gross domestic product, taken directly and indirectly. In some way you're connected, and in some way you're going to feel it. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, we have to be mindful of the fact that in all of this, we are in a fragile financial position and have to work our way out of that. Now, as I said to you, Mr. Speaker, sir,
Remember, have 5 more minutes.
the challenge that we face, sir, has to be dealt with frontally. If we look at the Tourism Development Act, it is very clear that that act can be used for more than just customs waivers and for more than tax concessions. I have said to the executive of the BHTA only this evening that I urge them to go to the Tourism Development Act between sections 30 and 32 in particular, and I will speak to their general meeting tomorrow in the same terms. Because, sir, there is a developmental opportunity where we can use this downtime for constructive purposes. We need to use this downtime, sir, and work with the Ministry of Finance, which is, even as I speak, trying to negotiate some elbow room with the International Monetary Fund so that we have more financial space, and, sir, to find a way to recapitalize our Small Hotels Investment Fund. The small hotels need to be recapitalized so that they can refurbish themselves. Mr. Speaker, sir, the Enterprise Growth Fund or some similar fund needs to be recapitalized so that we can make sure that larger hotels are able to refurbish themselves. But above and beyond that, what are we doing about training? Would it not be a good thing, sir, to train our workers during this downtime? It need not be about layoffs. People can be kept at work. This country needs to understand that this is not the summer to get on American Airlines and go to Disney World because Disney shut down. This country needs to understand that this is not the summer to go to New York City and shop at Macy's because there is a greater risk there than here. This country needs to understand that there are hotels in Barbados and experiences in St. John and in St. Thomas and in St. Joseph, Mr. Speaker, sir, which are of a high quality, sought after by Europeans, Canadians, Americans, and that we in Barbados can help keep ourselves employed by doing a little bit of staycation and linking it to the attractions in Barbados. And the Tourism Development Act helps in that regard because when you build out that kind of development, you are entitled to get a rebate on it if you can satisfy the Minister of Tourism that it is a worthwhile product. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, the Minister of Tourism stand up in Parliament and telling the country that this is where they should go. I'm saying as well, Mr. Speaker, sir, that CARICOM travel is another option. Because as we look at CARICOM, sir, don't mind that there are one or two instances of cases. The reality is that the risk is far less in CARICOM than it is in other parts of the world. We have to keep our hotels and our attractions and experiences open for business, sir. It is also possible within the Act for businesses now to use this downtime to get themselves environmentally certified and therefore emerge more competitive than they were when this came about. Green Globe certification is actually part of what the Act encourages. But you know, in the 2 years I've been minister, sir, nobody's ever come to me with a product about Green Globe, a proposal about Green Globe or any type of environmental certification of that nature. Similarly, sir, market analysis and the wherewithal to do that and be able to get a rebate on market analysis work so that you emerge from the difficulty in a more robust and nimble position to get to the top of the food chain once again. That Barbados can do this is within all possibility, Mr. Speaker, sir. But what we need to do is to go there as a team, which is why I've not chosen in this speech to be harsh on the Leader of the Opposition, because I don't believe the Leader of the Opposition has actually thought it through. I think he came to offer a few criticisms and done with that. But I want to urge him and his party, such as it is, to be part of this progressive action going forward, that the country as a whole must join hand in hand as we attempt now to provide the necessary support for the thousands upon thousands of people who are working in hospitality in Barbados, who have been able to position this country to be one of the most competitive in the marketplace internationally, and whom we must now protect and reinforce so that they emerge from this, sir, in a better position than they were when they went into this. And the opportunities, sir, are almost endless. I talked about refurbishment. I talked, sir, about the Green Globe thing, sustainable tourism, investment in recycling and climate adaptation. Energy conservation is another area, sir. There are a number of areas where we must now use the opportunity, in addition to the training of the staff, which is a critical thing that we must do. We must use the opportunity to strengthen this industry and strengthen all of the institutions in the industry so that they can be more competitive as we go forward. And Mr. Speaker, sir, over the course of the next couple of weeks, beginning tomorrow morning, I will go and I will address and interface with the BHTA at their quarterly meeting. And we're going to put this front and center for the sector and for the country. I am not interested unless the worst has come to the worst in the doomsday prediction. Out of this cloud, sir, must be found a silver lining of opportunity for us to reinvest in the sector that has carried Barbados for all these years. And if we fail at this time, sir, then we failed the whole country. And I don't think that failure is an option. I'm obliged to you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for St. Michael Southeast.
Yes, Deputy Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of the sitting until 10 a.m. tomorrow.
Question is that this House be suspended until 10 a.m. tomorrow. All members in favor say aye. Those against say no. We think the ayes have it. This House is now suspended until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.